So, we'll do an interview about self-investigation. I'll kick this off just by kind of reading a short definition. This comes from our self-investigation guide. Like, what is self-investigation? So we just keep this very short. We call it the
Mhm.
practice of systematically taking ourselves apart in order to understand who we really are, to sense, deconstruct, and expand our private bubble of reality. So
Yeah.
I'll ask a question to kick this off, and you can feel free to modify or expand that definition however you like. But the
Sure.
kickoff
I'll do
question
my best.
is cool. Kickoff question is when did self investigation start for you?
All right. So, and that's kind of the big kicker too. Just to kind of add on to it really quick. It's just to even get to that point where you start to self-investigate. So to me, it was definitely an inciting event. So it started for me, I would say pretty close to about 5 years ago. And I had just gotten laid off from a job that I had for about 5 years, and it was a pretty good job. Got to kind of travel the United States as a traveling technician and stuff, and Canada and stuff too. So it was pretty rewarding. Had a lot of really good, fulfilling experiences, and I was kind of on a career track where I felt like I was kind of moving up, and then it was kind of right after COVID, pretty much. Kind of had the rug pulled up from under me, just as things started kind of normalizing again. Like after the mandates started lifting, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think at the time the company I was working for, they ended up getting bought out by kind of another company that ended up being a parent company, and they were making some internal changes. So as part of one of those changes. So what was funny at the time is I was already kind of getting burnt out from that job because I wasn't home a whole lot. I mean, I was making pretty good money, at least enough to feel or to live comfortably, not really freak out over finances. But yeah, I ended up kind of getting the axe, and I was like, well, I was kind of surprised at myself that I didn't feel more bent out of shape about it than
Hmm.
you think you would. If anything, it was kind of more of a relief. And what's funny is I got the call right after I got off the plane from a job. So it was just like not even enough time to get home and kind of get relaxed before they dropped the
Mm.
ball on me, or dropped the bomb on me. But anyway, from that point, they kind of gave me a nice little severance package, so I was able to kind of coast for a while. And also during that time, I was just coming off of like a career of just binge drinking too. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the industry I was in kind of supported that in a way. I
Mm-hmm.
was part of like the beer industry.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of in the environment where it was just kind of copacetic, right? So they ended up being a real big favor, kind of being getting dropped out of that environment, and kind of right there, just kind of like coasting on severance for a while. I had a lot of time to myself to kind of think and about where I'm going to go, but at the same time I was like, let's kind of take this opportunity to kind of get to know myself a little bit better, kind of stuff like that, even though what that looked like at the time was just playing a lot of video games and and not really doing a whole lot much of anything at all. But I think that was kind of part and parcel to what was going to come next. And so the big event that it kind of all led up to is I was just kind of lying in bed one day, just chilling, not really doing much of anything, and not really thinking about much of anything either. I was just kind of, there in a kind of state of emptiness, I guess you could say, in a way, just not really thinking or doing much at all. And then finally, or suddenly, I started feeling like this activity going on near my feet, like this kind of a strange sensation. And I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a cramp coming on or something. I thought it was just some kind of normal biological or physical kind of event. And then I started feeling it kind of moving, kind of up my leg a little bit, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. Hold on a second. So I have cats, and they like to complain.
Yeah.
I said I'll let them in. So anyway, yeah, this kind of felt like an energetic force kind of moving up my leg, and then it just kind of kept coming, and I started getting a little freaked out, and I was like, because I didn't know what was going on, but at the same time I was like, well, it doesn't hurt, it doesn't feel like anything majorly bad is happening, but at the same time I could have been fooling myself. I had no idea what was going on. But I was like, let's just kind of sit with it and see what happens, just kind of see where it goes. And if it turns out to be a real major issue, then I'll have to do something about it. So anyway, I was just kind of letting it do its thing, and I kept gradually kind of rising up my body and got up to my waist and then up to my torso and kind of up to my heart. I'm like, okay, well, here we go. Like, what's it going to do now? It's getting up to like the vital organs, right? And then I got up to my heart, and it just kept on rising and rising, and it didn't feel, like I said, it didn't feel bad or anything. It just felt kind of neutral, but powerful. And then finally, it went all the way up to like my head or my crown. And then by the time it hit like the apex, it just like something shifted, like something just blew open my perception. And I was just kind of enraptured in like a state of oneness and openness and kind of a state of rapture or ecstasy that I've never really experienced before, except for one time when I was really younger, but we can come back to that later. But yeah, I was just kind of in the state of bliss and just connection with everything. And I was like, what is going on? I had no basis for, like, no real basis for comparison. I didn't really know a whole lot about spirituality except for like stories from like out of body experiences. Like I was kind of into Robert Monroe and had a Christian kind of evangelical background, but that was it. I didn't really have like a container for this, what was happening to me. And anyway, I kind of that state kind of stuck with me for a few days, and I guess I started kind of dripping into what would be called a state of spiritual psychosis in a way, because it was my brain was getting scrambled, like everything was kind of like all associations are starting to kind of fall apart, as far as like who am I and what am I in relation to the universe and what is everything. So like everything was just kind of like falling away like that. And then I just remember feeling this deep sense of like equanimity, like I felt like I was just like a monk or something, or like it got to the point where I started kind of feeling like Jesus Christ incarnate,
Hmm.
which is part of the spiritual psychosis,
Hmm.
and my poor wife was freaking her out, the whole time. And then I started kind of experiencing, just kind of as this was going on for a couple of weeks at least, started experiencing like old um, patterns kind of come up to the forefront of my mind, and all these like traumas that were kind of really layered like down and deep in the subconscious are starting to kind of come up, like kind of percolate a little bit, like a little bit at a time. And I started to find like this internal duality within myself that was between like what I was experiencing and all these old vestiges of like belief systems and everything like that in myself that were like coming up for into my attention. And so but yeah, it took a while to kind of integrate, and I still had a lot of kind of learning to do. And so that's kind of when my spiritual seeking, or the search for the truth, basically what was going on with me, but also what's going on with reality and all that, really started in earnest. And I've just kind of been on that journey ever since. I've had a lot of realizations, had a lot of kind of personal events that are kind of smack of something Young would talk about, like you read his like Red Book and stuff like that, or I would read it and I'd be like, yeah, I kind of see what he's talking about, and same goes for like a lot of spiritual doctrines, a lot of them are just kind of explaining the same thing, just wrapped up in different packaging, right? And
Hmm.
come to kind of figure that out later. But one point I do want to make is I feel like I kind of got lucky in the sense that when people kind of go through this, where they turn next kind of determines like their starting point, and they can kind of get stuck there, right? And I feel I got lucky in the sense that I started kind of getting into non-duality, because that's kind of what made sense, as far as, because I went to like Google after that, try to type in my experience in the search, basically like a nutshell version of it. And then, it led me to like non-duality, but not just like Advaita Vedanta, but Kashmiri Shaivism. And I ended up getting pulled into that route instead of just non-duality, which I think really saved my ass in some ways, because getting sucked into non-duality, you're just like, oh, it's just the great expanse that you just dissolve into, and that's it, like nothing else matters, kind of a thing, and I don't matter, and it's just the observer, and the observer is just the falling away of all the forms, all of the fake stuff, which I agree with to some extent, but it's also just kind of like a self annihilation,
Hmm.
and it's also trying to annihilate everything else around you. It's kind of denying reality in a way, and because I mean, yeah, you can live there if you want to, but you're not going to do a whole lot. You're just going to be kind of sitting there doing nothing your whole life, but feeling pretty good about it, I guess. So, but in contrast, Kashmir Shaivism is like it's yes and it's yes all that, but there's also like this force. There's like this creative kind of intelligent kind of life force that brings play to the system. It brings life and novelty and just the patterns, and the chaos and everything to life, and that's kind of what it is. If I was gonna try to match the idea of Kashmir Shaivism or the philosophy to like a scientific kind of concept, then it would be entropy. It would just be the process of entropy, yeah, or between entropy and neg entropy. Basically, it's chaos, but it's also making patterns out of that chaos. And to me, that's what I think life is. Whereas non-duality by itself is just a negation of both, or just order. It just there's nothing, So everything to be totally ordered would just be stagnant and nothing, And then you have the reverse would be true too. If everything's chaos, it might as well be nothing because
Hmm.
nothing will consolidate. So anyway, yeah, that kind of is a long-winded explanation there. But like I said, I kind of feel lucky I went on that track, and because it made a lot more sense to me, and makes it feel like it's more of affirming of life rather than just negating it. So,
Mm.
but yeah, that's kind of my Cliff Notes version of my awakening and kind of what brought me to self-investigation.
Yeah, that's great. And so I'll circle back on a couple points there. First, it sounded like this was not really, you were not trying to cultivate this. You were not really seeking it out. You were not like, following any kind of system. You mentioned a bit of Christian upbringing, but this sounds pretty spontaneous how it happened to you. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, spontaneous Kundalini awakening. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah. So then, how I can relate. My story is not quite the same, but it's similar in the sense that some insights occurred to me unprovoked, and I had to go Google and see who else was talking about things. And
Yep.
so I mean, how was that process for you? Like, was it was it like in a couple days you were onto Kashmiri Shaivism, or did it take a lot of stumbling around and kind of going down different roads, backing out, going down other roads? What was that process like to finally find something that felt right?
Yeah. So I would say I came into Kashmir Saivism pretty quickly. It only took me about a couple of days to figure out what's going on with me. But it's just like, what you would do if you had like some kind of some kind of event that happened to you physically,
Hmm.
like a disease or something weird happened to your body. What do? Go to WebMD, go to Google, like what's going on with me? So that was kind of immediately what I did. And then from that point, I guess I just typed in the right stuff to be pointed to Kashmir Shaivism pretty quickly, but also to Advaita Vedanta, kind of in that track, So I had a choice there, as well as presented with a choice, and so I was like, I'm going to go with Kashmir Shaivism because it seemed like, it felt like the more natural kind of progression for where I was coming from. I was kind of more pulled in that direction. So, but after that, I definitely got into kind of the spiritual cesspool, I guess
Hmm.
you could say, as far as there's so many different philosophies and kind of religions kind of that were wrapped around it. And I only had like a tenuous knowledge of a lot of them already, if that. So it kind of took a lot of digging in different kind of avenues, different kind of piles of doctrine and dogma and stuff like that, just kind of see what sticks, see what makes sense, and also kind of see where the fluff is, and it gets really easy to kind of get stuck in the fluff, in the rituals and stuff like that. And I kind of realized that a lot of that's kind of tied or ritual anyways, kind of tied to making something real. Like you do a ritual because you want to take what's in your mind or your belief and make it real in a way. You're trying to manifest it. And so by doing that, you're actually making it kind of more concrete in your mind. It's kind of reciprocal kind of a thing, like by making it real, you're actually reinforcing that belief about it, you know? And so, but luckily I've always been kind of, lazy when it comes to rituals. Like even back when I was younger doing the Christian thing, I wasn't like the good banner poster boy for Christianity to begin with, right? I was kind of like doing my own thing. And I kind of already seen like the kind of nonsense and there's a lot of stuff that people do. So luckily, I didn't get too stuck on ritual, but I did try different things out, and especially when it came to like meditations, and also when it came to like work of like Carl Jung. Like he has this type of meditations called active imagination, and
Mm-hmm.
that's actually really fun to do. And I can only do it sometimes. I'm not the best meditator. Like I come to find that it kind of comes to me when it's supposed to, if that makes any sense. It's like I can't really force it. Whenever I try to force it, I just get frustrated. I'll just
Mm-hmm.
sit there with my eyes closed, staring at the back of my eyeballs for a while and try to like remove all the thoughts or whatever, or just focus on an intention, whatever. And then I could sit there for an hour or whatever and then just be frustrated, feel like
Mm-hmm.
nothing happened. Like I'll have no energetic kind of internal a rectification, I guess you can call it, like, or fulfillment from what I'm doing. But sometimes like I could have the off chance where I'll meditate and something profound will happen and it'll just be like I walked into it. It just like it came to me just as much as I came to it. And so come to realize then that it's kind of a funny process. Like it's very personal. It's something that you can't just, it's not like one size fits all, just like, if you have a headache, here's a Tylenol kind of thing. It's something that's very kind of tailor made for you. But you don't know what it looks like. You just kind of have to show up and see if it comes to you or if you're in the right spot for it. And if you're not, then you might as well just be kicking rocks, or just wait longer. That's kind of what it seemed like to me. But
Yeah.
hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, you mentioned luck. You got lucky. I agree
Yeah.
that this can be a really vulnerable time where, your assumptions and beliefs, ideas are being uprooted and you're kind of looking for solid ground again. It's possible somebody can grab onto some kind of manipulative system or some guru and get sent down
Yep.
a rabbit trail, and that can take a long time to even notice. So,
Yeah.
that is
That's another thing to deconstruct.
yep, yep. So, and maybe I guess depending upon where in one's life is, our spidey senses are more attuned to that kind of thing. You might be able to detect you're getting into some funny business, or, but that I can only agree with you that ultimately it is luck that someone might be having such an experience and happens to find the right thing. Maybe with
Definitely.
our modern information landscape and people's skepticism might be flaring up a little more revved up a little more than past decades, and that might maybe
Hmm.
help them get to the right place. But who knows? It still comes down to luck, it seems.
Yeah, and just kind of spur off of that too. I think what luck is too is just kind of being able to recognize an opportunity when it arrives, and having the right equipment and the right kind of state of mind to kind of walk into it too. Like what was lucky for me could have been, not the right path for somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
and it could have been, I mean, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, it just kind of depends on where they're at. Because like somebody else could have gone down non-duality, or could have gone down Christianity or whatever, and yeah, maybe they could have get stuck in the belief systems, but at the same time, maybe that's kind of where they were on their journey. Maybe that's just where, because like I was saying earlier, it seems like, you know, um, something's kind of waiting for you to show up too. Like, like you can't just force it. Sometimes things are just kind of, could they come to you when you're ready for them? So, and so you can kind of consider it part of like an evolutionary path on your journey. You know, like where your cognitive predisposition is, your the beliefs that you already have about yourself and the world. You know, a lot of that kind of colors like your perspective. You know, and so I think that just kind of were the path that I went could have had a lot to do with just my predisposition. You know,
Hmm.
as well too. So I mean it's just kind of a different way of looking at luck too. You know, like a lot of it, people think it's just like, well, it's just like it raining money for you all of a sudden one day, you know, and just being in the right place at the right time. But yeah, it is that, but it's also kind of being in the right place within yourself to be able to recognize what's going on and be able to take advantage of it. You know, and
Hmm.
see it as it pertains to where you are at that particular moment in time.
Um, I can go in a few directions here, but maybe just to kind of keep going through the timeline. So, this is post COVID. The job got lost. This felt very strange, and then this experience happened, and you took
Yeah.
when you were making sense of it. Approximately how long did it take? In a sense, we're always making sense of it, but in the short term, when did it really kind of start to feel like stable again after this happened?
That's a good question. I guess there's different levels of stability, you know, and because we're always kind of grasping for it. We're always trying to find security and safety and stability wherever we're at. And we're so used to kind of having just a bombardment of like stressors from the outside world put on us and within the internal world in relation to the outside world, right? So I think it's just kind of a process. I don't know if I ever got fully to that point. I think that's what everybody's kind of goal is, especially when it comes to spirituality, is to find that total state of like, oh, everything's great. But also I feel that's kind of a negation of life too in a way because life keeps going. But anyway, I'd say that it got better kind of progressively and through a series, kind of a disjointed series or seemingly disjointed of profound events, you know, and it could be like traumas coming up from, you know, from below the surface to be dealt with and when I say dealt with, I mean just kind of first seen, recognized, and really felt, you know, and I think that's the biggest part of it is just like learning how to fully feel what's going on in your body. Then you can kind of look at it, you know, and look at it from outside looking in perspective as much as you can. Don't let it become you, you know. So I mean, it's kind of like the idea of being the observer. It's kind of looking at what's going on, and then you can kind of use your use your analytical mind as kind of like a tool instead of just trying to beat it over the head. You know, you just kind of looking at it as, okay, what's going on here? What can I tie it back to? And what's the cause to this effect kind of a thing? And then you kind of fully like let it well up within you. And then you kind of like give it a name, like, or at least see where it's coming from, acknowledge it, kind of let it go, kind of a thing. So it was kind of that process, which I'm sure you know, all about. But there was a lot of that, a lot of then that's kind of tied up into shadow work, stuff like that, a lot of shadow work. And I had some pretty intense experiences with that. As far as I'd say kind of the most intense really was like how this container that I had within me that was just kind of an amalgamation of all of these like really deeply held rooted beliefs that I had about myself and because I had a pretty like pretty rough upbringing. I dealt with like social anxiety a lot. I dealt with depression really bad, and just generalized anxiety. Like I had a lot of fear, you know, and that manifested in my life in a lot of ways when I was younger. And I didn't have really good coping mechanisms. I kind of, I was really reserved. I shut down a lot, and just kind of withdraw from life and not really connect with other people. And when I did, I felt like I always had to do something. I always had to like put on a mask of some kind just to kind of fit in. You know, I always felt different from everybody else. And so there's like a lot of that stuff, you know, and when that becomes like a core belief, you know, then that wants to survive too. Like that part of yourself wants to exist,
Hmm.
you know. And so so after my awakening experience and going on this journey, then I was kind of pulling away from that. I was trying to create like something else. I mean, I guess you can call it another persona, but to me, it was just like what the truth is. It's just what trying to find what the truth isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of me, I felt like it's. I mean, it's something like I never liked anyway, but I defended the shit out of
Mm-hmm.
it. My whole life. And I would get triggered by other things that just make me remind myself of like what I didn't like about myself or what I hated about myself. And there was just a lot of that. And so I kind of got to the point of like pulling away from that. And in that process of pulling away, it would fight back. It would like try to claw onto my psyche or like within my body as much as it could. And I could actually feel like a visceral kind of like a bifurcation between the two. And and they would kind of revolve around each other. Like some days, the old patterns would kind of win, and I would just be miserable all day, and just really beating myself up and stuff. And then I'll be able to kind of like get my head back above water, and then just kind of keep working with it, and keep acknowledging it and say, hey, it's okay, let's work with this together and get through this. So it's been kind of just this whole back and forth like that. And that always kind of goes on, but like I said, there's some times that it was really really intense, and it felt like actually what it reminded me of was I can't remember exactly the where it is in the Bible, but I think it was Elijah. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was an account of wrestling with an angel, and that's kind of what it felt like. It was like it was like wrestling with an angel, but also wrestling with the demon. Like the wrestling with the angel part would be like all the stuff that's good, like all the natural progression of my spiritual journey, or just my journey of trying to be better, self improvement was the angel part that I was wrestling with. And then the demon I was wrestling with was the other side that was trying to pull me back down. So it felt like, and it would be exhausting. It would be, you feel like you just ran a marathon after doing this kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a lot of like events like that. And, also just kind of out in the world, like how I would, my relationship with like my wife, for instance, like it would bring in like certain challenges that would kind of be reflected off of myself. And then I have to like, yeah, because everything that you take in, like you ingest everything that comes at you, and so then you have to process it after. And I think what I was just doing before was just like adding it to my pile of crap before, and then it kind of, then it took some time to kind of during the process of integration and learning to realize, hey, I could think about this stuff, and I can give myself pause and time to reflect and then respond, which doesn't always happen automatically still to this day, but it's something that always kind of, it's my guiding principle in a way. I always kind of, it gives me something to work towards,
Mm-hmm.
and it pays dividends.
Yeah, so it sounds like in this wrestling match, which is a great way to kind of describe it, um, you had this ability, this capacity to recognize this sort of like switching between these two, or I guess different feelings, two baskets of energy and feelings, and coming at you and alternating. That capacity to observe those as that, is that something you had prior to all this experience, or did you have to kind of develop that with, you mentioned mindfulness meditation? Did that help the wrestling match and help you see these things and give you some perspective?
Definitely, yeah. As pertains to like mindfulness and self-investigation, those as tools were extremely helpful, and I felt like I just kind of naturally went down that road. And it was to the point where I was like, "Hey, this is a thing," and that's why I kind of learned from like other schools of thought and other teachings, stuff like that, that kind of revolve around that subject matter. And then so what I would do, I would just kind of go out there and or research and see what like different ways of doing things that I might not already be privy to. That I'd be like, oh hey, that's a good way of looking at it. I'll try that out. Or it could be just confirmations of things that I'm doing already, but it just goes a little bit deeper, And I found out it was kind of a little bit of both, which is also really fascinating, especially if you're on a certain track. Like say if um, I don't know if I could think of a good example right now, but basically you could be having some kind of realization like through meditation, or just like going throughout your day, driving down the road, and all of a sudden you just happen to be thinking about stuff, and then you have a hit inspiration about it, or hit of insight, like, well, hey, morality is this, this, and that. When I used to think it was this, this, and that, like from church or whatever. And so, like, you could really start to unpack what you know about morality, and then go do some research on it, and then find out that that's been, it's already been thought of before by somebody, but that somebody could have been like a major philosopher, or it could have been, something that is known but not really widely talked about. And it could have just been, but like I said, it started with like a realization on your own, and then all of a sudden you just kind of see it everywhere, and then you go on YouTube, and then it just like comes to you. Like, I don't know if, like, it could be partly the algorithm in a way, and I think in large part it kind of is, but at the same time, you may not have even typed in something on YouTube yet. You just open up your YouTube, and then you have all this information staring right back at you that has to do with what you just thought about
Mhm.
earlier that day.
Mhm.
So it's like stuff like that would happen too. And you're like, like there'd be synchronistic kind of events, and then you'd be like, is that kind of a lark? Is that a fluke? Or, is there something else going on there? So, but yeah, I mean, it was just really interesting. So I wanted to make sure to point that out. Like, that would happen sometimes, and it still does. And, but it just kind of makes it fun and interesting too, when you kind of go down that path and you recognize those things happening. But yeah, it took, but like I said, the process of mindfulness, like, is just really taking all these different tools and techniques, applying it to yourself, seeing what works, ditching what doesn't, and then that's just kind of, lather, rinse, and repeat.
Did you have any mindfulness experience prior to the kind of big event?
Uh, Not too much. I would say that I would kind of get myself caught up in old patterns, and alcohol kind of really provided like a fog too,
Hmm.
to where I
Hmm.
wouldn't focus on certain things, and it was just kind of, it was just a process of defending the parts about myself I didn't like, and just being totally oblivious to that I'm doing it to myself. It felt like I'm always defending myself rather than noticing that I'm the one beating my own head into the wall.
Yeah, so
Or I would do it and just, yeah, go ahead.
that's a major change. That basically there's the
Yeah,
pre life. It sounds like, you had all this stuff inside like everybody does, but we accumulate these experiences and traumas and this amalgamation we call self. And if we don't like it, we can numb it, we can ignore it. But then you had this experience that kind of just opened you up, and it was part equanimity, part questioning things. The beliefs came unrooted, and that's when it sounds like that's when the mindfulness seed started to grow there, and you began to look at things and hold it differently and respond to it differently. Is that right?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can say though, that I've always, like, throughout, since I was a child, I've always kind of had an interest or a fascination with, like, things beyond what we could see, or
Mm-hmm.
basically paranormal, right? Because I did have some experiences in that regard quite a bit, kind of growing up, but I didn't really have a good container for it. I didn't have a good place to put it. I just had, what I knew about religion, and just like little smatterings of like Eastern spirituality and stuff, like reincarnation and stuff like that, and like out of body experiences, near death experiences, and those things always kind of fascinated me. But then again, sci-fi always fascinated me when I was a kid too. So for a while, I kind of put them in the same camp, but I knew that there's something more to, like, kind of like these paranormal experiences, as far as like realized, kind of felt visceral experiences in your subjective kind of framework that you couldn't explain away, and but my only the only way I could really handle those things was just through what I could learn about them at the time. So, but it wasn't until after my experience where I started really diving into that too, in a way where I could actually start to kind of synthesize a lot of that, in a way that made, I would say, make more sense, but that's not really the right way of putting it. I would say where it felt more true, as part of like a greater framework of what I know of as the truth.
And maybe we'll quickly address the word spirituality. You know, I think in my own experience, I've tried my best to use that word carefully, and also when someone else uses it, try really hard to understand how they mean it. I feel these kinds of conversations don't need the word spirituality, but because of what we've talked about a lot here, there's so much precedent in history that's kind of packed under this umbrella of spirituality. I
Yeah.
think in a different conversation, you called it sort of a Costco of, you know, this warehouse of all kinds of ideas, and that's a really
Yeah.
appropriate way to look at it. So how do you feel about that word? How do you kind of translate it for yourself in these conversations?
I think that spirituality can mean different things depending on where you're at and what you know. Um, and just kind of like the different there's a lot of different angles you can see any type of word or any type of concept, right? And spirituality, I think, is one of those words that carries a lot of baggage. There's a lot of associations that I can pick up depending on where you're looking at it from. If you're standing on the Christianity mountain, spirituality looks like a judgmental God, and Satan that's always out to get you. If you're standing over on the Buddhist mountain, it's going to look like, transcendental meditation and all this stuff. And I think that's kind of what it is. Spirituality to different people looks like rules. It looks like these subsets of like concepts, all wrapped up into this major central theme that could mean that in itself means different things to different people. So I think, like I said, it's just the best. That's the only word that we have right now, but it's as good as any other, as far as language is concerned. But kind of over time, what spirituality meant to me, like when I was younger, it meant, like I said, the Christian kind of standpoint, because I didn't have anything else. And plus, it was kind of beat into my head. You're kind of born into it. It's just like, like my lungs breathe air, and there's also a God that'll smite you if you mess up. Like you put him in the same camp of reality. And then kind of throughout my journey, spirituality ended up becoming something entirely different. And now I think it's just anything that's ineffable. It's anything that well, part of it is ineffable. It's because we can never really fully know what it is because it could be so many different things. But there's another part of it is what it really means to us. And that part that it means to us is that driving force within us that seeks the truth. It's the part driving force within us that seeks knowledge and to know where we're headed, you know, and because that's all it really is. Spirituality is like, are you going to go to heaven or hell when you die, or are you going to be a part of the everything, or are you just going to be snuffed out of existence? I guess it's not so much spirituality, but I guess it could fall under that category, if you wanted to. But yeah, it's always just about what's coming next, instead of like, where am I at right now? It's usually what's coming next. What do I have to look forward to? And that's where I think people get stuck the most is trying to think of spirituality as this always a sense of becoming or waiting to become something that's as far away from where you are now. But as long as you believe it, then you have a shot of getting that good thing that's at the end. But I think what it really is just seeing where you are now and just accepting things as they are now and getting rid of all of this baggage that's attached to spirituality, but also everything else, part of it. I mean, it's not mutually exclusive. It's just like, you just kind of throw the same principles and the values that you kind of cultivate through your journey of mindfulness and all that. And then kind of see what's there, what's there at the end of it, after you kind of do the sussing out process.
Yeah, I think where you landed is, I mean, I just happen to completely think that's the most elegant way someone can put it is seeing where you are now and seeing everything that's extraneous and
Yes.
what's left. And
Yep.
I don't, I think, of course, uh, we can't ever leave it there because the whole world will talk about it in different ways and there's disambiguation and But if one really tries to distill it down, I think that's about as best of a position. Thomas Metzinger,
Yeah,
recently he called it the extreme epistemic position, and I think that's kind of another way of saying the same thing. It's like seeing where you are now and seeing everything that's extraneous, and
definitely.
so I
Yeah,
see some harmony
I
there.
th definitely. I think another way of putting it, just for my Northern California side of me, wanting to add in the metaphor, is it's kind of like panning for gold. Like when you're out there and you're just, you got your plate or whatever. I can't remember what you call it, but yeah, you got your plate and you shove it in some dirt, in a riverbed, and then you pull it out, and all you see is dirt. You don't see gold, you don't see anything else, and then it's just a process of just like getting all that dirt out of the way until you find little specks of gold. You're not hoping for a big nugget, you're hoping for little bits, but all those little bits will add up over time,
Yeah,
and then you got a vial full of good stuff after a while, but you have to keep at it. Like if you stop at any point, then you'll get nowhere, you'll just see dirt.
yeah, and I would label that that digging and filtering as self investigation, right? So,
Definitely. Yep.
so let me ask you this. So we've talked a lot about this experience. Your life roughly before the experience itself, and then now we've talked about the integration phase. And how was your everyday life starting to change and adapt as this was going on in parallel?
Internally, very, very much so. Very drastic changes. And sometimes it get frustrating because the external world wouldn't always match my
Right.
internal kind of progression. The outside life just kind of kept trotting along. But there, I think there was times when I was especially kind of in the thick of it, and also by trying to make my external world, or the first, I think it's from the frustration of the external world not matching my internal world as far as the changes I'm going through, but also just from the process of integration and listening to myself more. I think there were some pretty messy periods that came out of that where it turned into like job hopping quite a bit. Because of course I had to get back to work after my severance ran out, or else, probably wouldn't be sitting here talking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, but but because I have responsibilities too, so I had to make sure I got back on top of those. They weren't just going to go away. So, but yeah, I found that I had a hard time kind of holding down jobs, and I was just kind of getting whatever I can get. But I'd start off just kind of feeling really good about it from this new sense of, oh, I'm spiritual now and I'm this whole new person, blah, blah, blah. And then I would just over time, get tired of it. Or just not resonate with what I was doing. I just see all the flaws in the system and the establishment and the man, which I always kind of had, but it was like amplified
Yeah.
at this level because it was already kind of an inherent part of me, but it was becoming more amplified. And so I had a real hard time with just like putting up with BS, you know, and so yeah, I had a really tumultuous kind of turbulent time, when I was dealing with that. And my poor wife was just kind of along for the ride of all that. And she was freaking out. Her sense of security in me was thrown asunder. And so luckily, I started kind of coming back down to earth after a while, which took some time. I'd say probably a couple of years, and then I got to the point where like, okay, now I can kind of handle stuff, and not kind of fly by the seat of my pants so much. And luckily, I got this job now that is like everything the doctor ordered, man. Like
Nice.
it fits me so well. And like I know it didn't come from me, man. It came out of the blue. Like I didn't even like look for the place or find the place and apply. Like they came, like a recruiter came to me
Mm.
and it ended up being such a good fit as far as like the work environment and the perks and the benefits and all that good stuff, like, and like it just checked all the boxes. And it, as far as like my temperament is concerned, it kind of matched that. It matched like the way that I work. And it was also my wheelhouse as far as what I'm good at, like on a career level, which is kind of more of an office job type of thing. And it's within like industrial sales, that kind of a thing. but it's to me, it's I could do the stuff blindfolded and asleep. You know, like it's really easy to me. And so yeah, I got real lucky, you know, like, and that only came when I wasn't looking for it. Like, and I noticed that too. Like a lot of the really profound experiences, relationships that I've had in my life that meant a lot to me, I never went looking for. They always came to me.
Yeah, there is, I don't want to emphasize this too much, but it can't help but note synchronicity seems at play in our lives sometimes. And it's just, that sounds like an example of it. You mentioned a few
Yeah,
examples that sound kind of along that lines. Things finding you at the
right.
right time.
Yeah, definitely. And what's funny is sometimes you'll get a joke with it. You'll get like a little wink from the universe. It seems like the I don't want to dox myself too much by saying the name of the company I work for, but the name of it is very much in line with like where I was as far as like the universe or my conception of the universe and spirituality and all that stuff. Like it was like the name itself was kind of wrapped up in
Mm.
that, you know, like, and that was kind of like a wink to me, you know, like,
Hmm.
hey, you know, we see you, we got you, you know, and it ended up being like everything that I needed. And I was like, thanks, you know.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that I mean that stuff hasn't stopped to this day. Like, you know, even though the job pays pretty like well enough, you know, like just like the state of everything right now, costs going up and everything, you know, finances are pretty tight. But whenever I find myself in a situation where things are like dire, you know, I'm like, oh man, what am I gonna do? Like, I have to go like find another job, or I have to go like sell some stuff and all this stuff. And then like when I feel like things are like down to the wire, then out of nowhere, you know, just money will pop up. You know,
Mm.
it'll be like $100 in the mail, or it'll be like, oh hey, you got a raise, or it'll be like, you know, or like, hey, you got a bonus, you know, at work, you know, like it'll be something, or it'll be like, oh hey, like we have to refund this, you know, this purchase that you made because there was a problem, so here's your money back, you know, and it'll just be totally out of the blue, but it always happens right when you need it. And it's never like, oh hey, you know, I'm already have pretty good with money and this, you know, and this other stuff is happening, you know, it never really happens then. It only happens when I kind of really need it. So I
Mm.
always felt like that was really cool as far as synchronicities are concerned.
Mm.
You know, it's like you feel like something's looking out for you even though you have no idea, and there's no way you can prove it, you know.
Right. Right. Um, you mentioned, so as you're experiencing all this, you're obviously very close with your wife. Was it hard to talk about this and like, I mean, it must have been, but like, could was she in any position to understand what was going on, or maybe even you were found it hard to even convey what was happening? I'm guessing over time, this, you both have learned, but that must have been tricky. That must have been tricky to try to explain to her how the tectonic plates were shifting inside of you, and have her kind of understand what was happening. Um, must have been hard.
Yeah, no, definitely wasn't easy. And, you know, because she's a human being too, you know, and she has her own way of looking at stuff and her own kind of beliefs and stuff that, you know, she does and the way that she thinks. So, which there's a lot of parallels, like both kind of spiritual as far as what we both believe that there's other stuff going on, but she's she's made way more kind of in the rituals than I am, you know, so we butt heads on a few things, you know, unfortunately, but at the same time there's like certain principles that we do agree on, you know, and so that's why I kind of like steer towards, you know, like where can we kind of get along on like how we think about these things
Hmm.
and what are the things that we could probably work on or just, you know, kind of keep on the back burner for now until the right time comes where we can kind of deal with it. But yeah, definitely, it's been kind of like there's been times when it's been abrasive, you know, like when something's going on with me, and it would just she was just kind of along for the ride. And when you feel like you're along for the ride, you're not really happy about it, especially when things aren't really going well. And there's other times that we just kind of clash. Like I'd have a certain realization, but that did not fit with her worldview, and so we just, you know, they just become a point of contention that we just couldn't get past, you know, and that's just how it goes,
Hmm.
you know. So you know, while you know, we complement each other in some ways, we still kind of run into our conflicts, but that's life, you know. Like that's why I kind of got like I laugh at well, not meaning I respect it too because I understand where people are coming from. But when it comes to like the twin flame thing and the soulmate thing, like like people are like it's like getting two puzzle pieces, you know, that like or that are just like missing each other, and you lock them together, and then boom, you have your full person, right? You know, you have the right match. You know, I'm like, well, that's nice in fairy tale land, but and it might work out for some people. Maybe that's just like how their life goes, and that's great. But like I said, it's not like Tylenol, man. It's not one size fits all. You know, like everybody has their own path in life and everything, and most often than not, you're going to find some conflict. You're going to find a lot of friction, you know, and yeah, it sucks sometimes. Sometimes you just want to be like, I wish you could understand me, and I wish I could understand you, you know, and you run into that all the time. But and I think that's kind of more the experience that people have versus that version of heaven of finding your soulmate, you know. But yeah, like yeah, it's ups and downs, kind of bumpy times sometimes with how we relate to each other, but we never really deny each other. Like she
Yeah.
has her way of looking at things, and she knows I have mine, and sometimes it might clash, and sometimes it might be a problem, you know, when stuff needs to get done for whatever. But you know, we always move on. You know, like we just that's just another moment that passes.
Yeah. And finding common ground is always kind of the, you know, the universal uh, game of any sort of human misunderstanding, and that could be person to person, community to community. You know, that feels like the right move in any situation, not just in close
Right.
relationships. Um,
Definitely.
you mentioned a few thinkers, or we can call them philosophies and practices. Meditation came up. Um, Carl Jung came up. Are there any other, like top three influences other than what you already mentioned? Journaling could be techniques, could be philosophies, could be thinkers.
Yeah, it's been a lot. Yeah, just kind of throughout my journey, you know, I've been taking a lot of different information from a lot of different places, and sometimes I don't always remember like where it came from. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
like I
hard.
just kind of take a little bit. Yeah, but where I'm kind of at lately is I started really getting into kind of in a way of like making sure that I'm not going down the dogmatic path. I kind of strayed away from spiritual teachings and stuff like that, which is great because it started that way, you know, too. Like with Kashmir Shaivism, and I got into like Abhinavara Gupta, you know, and that was the philosopher behind Kashmir Shaivism, and his stuff is really great, man. And what I really liked, well, my biggest takeaway from his philosophies is that you don't need to be a guru, you don't need to be a monk, you don't need to go live in a cave. You know, you could be just your average Joe. You could just be a regular guy living your regular normal life, and you can still have these profound experiences. You know, and you can still learn how to be your full self. You know, and so I felt that that was my big takeaway from that. You know, and I was like that it's okay. You don't need to achieve some kind of status to have certain experiences, you know. And also, I kind of like the guy because he's a musician. You know, he his whole shtick was to kind of sit up on a grassy knoll and play their version of a guitar, basically. And I'm, you know, I used to be a guitarist. Well, I guess I still am, but you know, I don't really pick it up these days. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, but yeah, I found some commonalities, you know, between me and him, and he seemed like a pretty chill guy. So I
Yeah,
was like, okay,
nice.
I can pick up what he's putting down, even though he's like ancient history.
Mm-hmm.
And well, then I got into like from that, I got into wanting to come at it from a more realistic, or when I say realistic, I mean kind of more scientific or kind of analytical kind of way of looking at these
Yeah,
concepts. And
great
so I kind of
segue
got
because
into,
that was my next
yeah,
question. Not to interrupt you, but just how do you map science on all of this? So please continue on that along those lines.
exactly. So yeah, so I started getting into like philosophy. So I started getting into like Immanuel Kant, and that's really dense stuff. But yeah, the critique of reason or critique of all reason or whatever. I mean, that was a good way of of kind of showing like what's real versus what we think is real, like how we just kind of project our own reality onto the real world. And then that kind of goes back to like Plato and Socrates, Aristotle, kind of doing the same thing, especially with Plato, like his theory of forms. Then you have Pythagoras, kind of the same thing, so they're all kind of variations on the central thing, right? And just kind of jumping ahead, I started getting into like psychology, like we started really getting into Adler, or Alfred Adler, which is kind of one of the unsung heroes of psychology. He was up there with, or right next to Freud and Jung, but nobody really knows who he is. And he ended up basically paving the way for what do you call it? Unconditional regard, positivity, kind of psychology, the psychological method of unconditional regard or positivity, which ended up becoming more popularized by Carl Rogers, the Rogerian therapy, and also Rogerian logic. So, but yeah, and that his big thing was kind of apart from Jung and Freud, which was their big thing was like how what's going on inside. Like Freud was more based off of what's going on with like the instinctual patterns and drives within you. Jung was more like what's going on with the archetypical mind, like myth and kind of the forms that we create around ourselves in the world, and how we could actually use those as tools to better ourselves, to understand ourselves better. Um, and then Adler was more about like who are we in relation to everybody else around us, and he was really big on what he called social feeling, and he felt like there's people that have that and really embody it, as far as like being part of the social group or communal group, and having shared values and shared principles versus kind of feeling like you're better than everybody else or entitled in some way, and felt like people kind of categorize themselves in these kind of two separate camps, and the way that they conduct their lives, more or less, kind of is determined by kind of your predisposition of like of where you kind of start, like, and it could be like traumas or whatever that make you one or the other, and he kind of recognized that, but he did emphasize that where we should be going is to have a strong social connection with others, but also having that within yourself too. And then you can kind of tie that into like Abraham Maslow, and then a
Yeah.
lot of his philosophies, um, and which I think was really great too. So later on, started getting into like actually just recently too, started getting into Nietzsche really, really, really deep. And what's funny too is when you come across like or you pick up a lot of knowledge and kind of perspectives from all these different really great minds, you'll start to like look at others or approach their material from a different vantage point, to where you can understand it or synthesize it a lot better internally versus if you would have looked at it when you were like 12 or 13 and you don't have like a frame of reference, then it just looks like noise.
Hmm.
It just looks like, oh, it's just a bunch of word salad. It can mean anything, but it doesn't actually have any bearing on material reality. It doesn't do anything for me. So, but that's why I thought it was kind of interesting. But as far as the people I've been reading, it's been a lot, but those are the big ones so far. And there's also always new stuff to learn. Like my sponge in my head is always wanting to pick up more stuff. And I just kind of recently learned about too. I can't remember the name of the guy that created this theory, but it's integral theory,
Ken
and
Wilber.
kind of started getting. Yes, yes, exactly. And when I started kind of diving into that too. And of course, there's like Ian McGilchrist, I really pick up what he puts down. And from a more kind of like the slightly more materialist side, which would be like Roger Penrose, like his stuff's really good too, and kind of how that ties in. And that's what a lot of it is, it's just kind of taking all these different perspectives and seeing like what fits together or what complements each other and what is, where the gaps are. And then I kind of look for the gaps. I keep looking to see like, okay, well, are these gaps even are they just trying to, or are they, how should I put it? Are they like ways or forms of trying to defend your own current sense of what you know about the world or a particular concept? Or are they just gaps because that's just where you don't have an explanation, And so that's why I think it's really interesting, is kind of like putting all these different things together, see where the gaps are, and but at the same time, just also really note where they come together, and kind of built a framework off of how all these things kind of synthesize.
Yeah, there's two things I'd really like to underline with what you just said. I mean, first is kind of specifically with Adler, who I'm only lightly familiar with, but what I'm taking away from you is his emphasis on understanding social connection and kind of, you
Yeah,
know, and that to me just seems like a pillar of self-investigation also is, we're not an island over, I mean, a true solipsist would argue otherwise, maybe, but there's apparently other people out there, and we can apparently interact with them and work together collaboratively to get towards truth, and that just seems extraordinarily powerful, and it seems also valuable to be aware of how we interact and are influenced by our this huge network of people around us. So that by itself just seems enormously important to contemplate and think about and integrate in one's life. But without even
yeah,
looking at the specifics of the 10 people you just mentioned, what you're doing really is another pillar, which is studying far and wide, and and doing so in a way where again you can do that to affirm what you already believe, or you can do it with skepticism and humility. And as you mentioned, by hearing one thinker and another thinker and a third and fourth and fifth thinker, you can kind of cross-reference them all and see where the gaps are. And there's no formula to do this other than to actually read far and wide. I think what we can do together as a community, not just you and I, but others we work with, is try to build a pool, a little library, so to speak, of thinkers. But as far as what to read and what order and what to take away from it, that's up for everybody to kind of do on their own. And it seems so powerful and important over the long run. And it's never ending, too.
right. Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of people out there that I've come to learn. You just go on YouTube and you can find a lot of people that are kind of on a similar path, and they'll have kind of their own takeaways too, But what I find is really interesting is there's a lot of people that are kind of coming out of the woodwork too, kind of more and more in recent years. Like I'll find these channels and they're maybe only a year or so old, and they're kind of talking a lot about a lot of the same stuff. So that to me is really, really, really heartening. It really gives me kind of hope and a sense of hey, like things on the outside, as far as like on the economic systems and stuff like that, political systems. They have, well, yeah, we have all these crises going on, but we have something else that's kind of bubbling up under the surface too, that's starting to kind of manifest like within the population. And then you kind of see this like happen on YouTube and other platforms too, where people are kind of on the same path and coming up with their own ideas and or about where they're at, but they also happen to line up with kind of where everybody else is at too, more or less, that are on a similar track. And but that track being, what's ultimate reality, what's the truth, and that might mean having to be willing to look at some stuff that seems paradoxical or contradictory at first, until you're able to kind of come at it where you can like at least somewhat include it within the framework, or at least place it somewhere where like, hey, maybe that's something I don't really have a way to make sense of right now, but it seems to kind of fit, because that's where everything kind of um, sorry, my brain's failing me at the moment, but basically it'll fit within a certain framework even if you don't fully understand it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you have to take other people's word for it, because it could be part of their subjective experience, even though you haven't experienced it yourself yet, but still kind of has the same flavor, basically. But yeah, if that makes any sense. I know that's
Yes.
kind of a haphazard way.
Yeah, I mean, more or less what I'm just reflecting from what you've described for the, you know, just about reading and thinking far and wide is there's really no substitute for it, and it is an ongoing thing. The more, granted, there's a huge so-called marketplace of ideas out there, and neither you and I are claiming like every idea is valuable, and there's way more ideas than we can possibly look at in a lifetime. So the game we're also playing is trying to, tease out the high quality stuff. High quality
Right.
meaning, at least a good attempt at truth and skepticism and humility, But
Yeah.
so insofar as we can find that quality stuff, to consider as much of it as we can, and that gives us a really
Yeah.
strong sense of truth.
Yeah. I think a good element to that is we try to do that despite ourselves by trying to remove ourselves from the equation as much as possible because we know that we could screw it up if
Hmm.
given an opportunity, because the way our minds like
Yeah.
to use the imagination, right? And our own pattern seeking behavior and all that stuff. So we try to like eliminate that and just see what's left, like see what the truth is, before we could screw it up.
Yeah, well, I'll plug the Constitution of Knowledge, which you and I both read, but it's, that's such a
Yeah.
big emphasis of that book is, you know, we have to learn to not to be skeptical of ourselves and our own perceptions and biases, and that's tricky. It's totally counterintuitive. You kind of boot up into life thinking you're seeing reality and you have a grasp on things, and then to question it feels wrong and scary. But it's
Yeah.
you know it's important.
Yeah.
So
No, it's because everything that you learn, it hijacks your survival instincts. Like all these beliefs are tied to, well, they actually have physiological associations, and so yeah, like if your dad says, hey, you better go to sleep at a certain time or you're gonna get punished or whatever, you're like, oh crap, I don't want to get punished, so I better go to bed, that kind of, but just variations on that, it's just like either do this thing or don't do this thing, because if you do the opposite of what we told you to, then it's not going to end well for you. And so your body takes that as, oh crap, I better listen or else I could die, or else I could have a really bad time,
mhm.
and so that's kind of what, that's it's all tied to our survival instincts. And so, and that's kind of like a project I'm working on too. I'm really good at working on all kinds of projects, but this one I'm kind of really focusing on. But it's that part of us that is like the internal animal, right? And just kind of a quick blurb about it. It's that, we're always fighting. It's something that we're always fighting against, like the whole moral structure when it comes to religion or just like society, rules, regulation, laws. It's all about saying that the primal part of you is bad. Don't look at it, ignore it, deny it, do everything you can to make sure that it doesn't see the light of day. And so what ends up happening is it gets repressed so crazily that what do you get out of it? You get crime, you get abuse, you get all this stuff that comes out of trying to deny something that society is telling you to deny. And so I kind of found that really fascinating as far as, how much of ourselves gets wrapped up in those concepts that it's just denying who we are as human beings, or this a large part of us, because we feel like if we don't do that, then we're going to get in trouble. We're going to go to hell or something, if we have lustful thoughts, or if we steal something because of some impulse, if or we just deny these impulses, or I mean, sorry, if we go along with these impulses, then that's the fast track to hell. That's basically what we're told most of the time. So what do you do with that? Like what do you do with that? Like how do you make sense of that? How do you sit with that, right? And I think that's where a lot of the problems that we have today come from. I'm not the first one to think of this. I mean, Nietzsche talks about this a lot too. Like he was really into trying to unpack morality and just kind of poke all the holes in it and say, hey, this is something's fishy's going on here. Like with Beyond Good and Evil, and even I spoke there Zarathustra. He talks about like there's a lot of stuff that we have to kind of throw off over the other side of the fence and see what's actually going on here. But yeah, that's what I've been finding really interesting is just trying to do away with all these things, all these lies and concepts about ourselves that is really just trying to run away from the things that we feel cause pain, and suffering, but instead of actually trying to accept these things as a part of life, or it may be something that'll actually make life richer if you learn how to manage them and actually integrate them in your life in a healthy and holistic way. you know um, Rather than that, we just kind of either overemphasize certain things to make us feel more powerful, like basically hijack our own instinctual drives. Like I said with lust, we might become over sexualized. We might become more wanting to not dominate others, in relationships or for status and stuff like that, and we just because we've been doing it for so long, we just consider that to be normal. And because we consider that to be normal and it doesn't fit within the moral framework, then we just consider all humanity to be bad. We just don't have faith in humanity. We just say, yeah, we're just a failed species. We're just going to wipe ourselves out, and we're wiping out the planet all along the way, which doesn't have to be true. And it's only true because we make it true,
Hmm.
because we believe all this crap that says that that's the way it is. And that's how I always hated growing up. And this is the last part of it here. But yeah, when I was growing up, I hated it when my parents would tell me, or any adult, anybody would tell me, that's just the way it is. And I always be thinking, why is that just the way it is? Who said, what mighty or almighty person decided that that's just the way it is? And I kept that throughout life, even to the point where, like, even Webster's dictionary, like Merriam-Webster, that guy was a psycho. That guy was like, he had OCD like crazy. And the dictionary was his outlet. It was his way of just like consolidating all this information and arbitrarily making these words and everything because it made sense to him. And then he was an academic, so therefore he's part of this organization that just really ate up the stuff he was putting out. And then they just decided, oh, hey, we're all going to do this now. When before him, which is what he hated, because it was so chaotic that you could have no actual standard for spelling, or the usage of certain words and stuff like that. And so he ended up just basically ratifying, language into something that's concrete, when it's not, but we're taught that it is. And that's so we have like grammar Nazis, and we have, classes teach in a certain way, when it comes to like phonics and grammar and all that, which is great. It helps language a lot, but a lot of it's so unnecessary. And you ended up tripping on yourself so much, even trying to be like a writer or something like that. Like, am I saying this, is this correctly? Is it grammatically correct? Is the sentence structure correct? Am I using periods, the right way? Am I using comma slices or semicolons the right way? You get so caught up in the shit that doesn't make that matter. As long as you get the message across, that's what matters. And so that's what I'm talking about. Like, and this stuff flies because people say that's just the way it is.
Yeah. There's a few things I can nod along with and comment back there. I mean, one, you can call it a perk, I guess, of uh, kind of tongue in cheek. A perk of self investigation is unshackling yourself from any kind of framework, including moral frameworks. So in a way, that's liberating. Now the tricky thing is the world continues to operate and is strongly influenced by centuries of moral frameworks that are often in conflict, and it's just insane. Um,
Yeah.
so that's the trick is, we can personally liberate ourselves, but we still live uh, you know, in proximity and often influenced by all these frameworks out there. So the trick is how can we continue, because another thing you brought up is, the this is how it is factor. And, I've heard this expression once. It was Yuval Harari say cooperation is the greatest force of nature, on the planet. Because if you could just think about the most destructive forces, like atomic weapons, for example, that's come about through human cooperation. So it's pretty amazing what cooperation can do for us, good and bad. And cooperation is a tricky thing because to be coordinated and cooperate, we need to like kind of settle like, okay, this is how it is in a few ways, right? Like everybody agreed this is how it is, this is how it is, this is how it is. But it's a slippery slope because that can go too far and feel oppressive and not make sense. So I don't want to go.
Yeah.
This is a fun topic. Hopefully we can
Mm-hmm.
dive into in more detail. I mean, not just that, but like, so cooperation is one topic we can blow open. Morality is another topic we can blow open. But I guess for this
Yeah.
conversation, I'm just nodding along, saying like, yeah, that's totally interesting territory, and at the very least, self investigation removes you from feeling like it is this way no matter what. It kind of gives you some your own authority to question things and think about things, and that's extraordinarily powerful and life changing.
Definitely. No, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's what's kind of interesting too, if you look at, because it seems like a big obstacle, right? It looks like, well, I mean, when you look at other people and you kind of see people stuck in their own belief systems that aren't themselves undergoing the process of self-investigation, and then you're kind of sitting there telling yourself, like, well, I mean, I can get out there and preach, basically, but no guarantee that your message is going to land, So what does it take for to increase the possibility of other people kind of uh, going through that path of like self-realization, self-actualization, and then self-transcendence too. And because it's not easy. It is not easy, and to a lot of people, it looks like it's connected to possible death. Because, like, say if they're just your average Joe that's going to church and living their life, going to work, and things are okay, not bad, then they don't really have a reason. They don't have a good reason to really muck that up. They don't have a reason to like throw everything just to the wind, right? Just so they could start really working on themselves. Usually it takes some kind of major event, like a car wreck or a heart attack, and even then it's not guaranteed. Like everybody is their reflex, their initial reflex is to go back to what they know. Like, say if you had something major happen, then you're trying to find homeostasis again. So it takes something major to where you can't go back home. Like you're like, there's no going back to the way you were before. You have to move forward, and kind of step into the unknown. Because even if there's like all these other types of people and like saints, gurus, or whatever that have gone down similar paths, it's them, not you. Like to you, it's just a story. So it has to be something like subjectively kind of felt and understood for it to actually mean anything to you. And so that's what you're kind of trying to get across to a lot of people. And that's what everybody's trying to do to each other too. Everybody thinks that the way that they see the world is correct, and nobody else understands them. And they only hang out with the people they think that do, or at least close enough to it. Otherwise, they just see themselves as apart from the rest of the world. And so, yeah, it's really tricky because of that. And so, what I think would have to happen is kind of what we're seeing today. And I kind of have this idea of looking at the world through like a fractal lens, which makes it really interesting. I don't know how accurate it is, but there's definitely some really profound, really interesting kind of synchronistic kind of similarities between them. And what I'm talking about is the individual as compared or in relation to the collective. And so, to the individual, the collective is the environment or a part of it. Like we and everything that we know about ourselves, and everything outside of us is a different type of environment. We have an internal environment, we have an external environment, and everything that we do is kind of an interplay between those two. And so, and that's kind of just evolution, right? Like, it's survival of the fittest, right? And what does that mean? It's survival of an individual to fit best within their environment, and also on a collective species level to fit with their environment. But the mutations usually happen on the individual level, which will then, through natural selection, become part of like the entire species, because it just ends up being a evolutionary advantage before, like better than what they had before. So it ends up kind of taking over. And so if you kind of go down that track, you can kind of see how that happens with humanity. Like we'll have somebody like Albert Einstein, that kind of really helps change the landscape, brings us into the atomic age. And out of the atomic age, then we have like the computer age and all that, but that was started by somebody, right? We had Alan Turing, we always have an individual that changes the landscape for everybody else. And so that, but whenever that happens, that means that we learn a lot more. We like our knowledge base expands. Like the stuff that we know today. If we were to go back in time to like the 11th century, hardly any of it would make any sense. They would have no basis for comparison or relation. And so we've evolved just the way that we think quite a bit, even though we kind of get stuck on the same stuff that we haven't figured out yet, but we keep coming back to it, and we're able to kind of look at it from different angles and different aspects because of these individuals that came along and said, hey, you know. And another thing that's really cool is we're not killing these people off outright like we used to, like anybody that like the stuff that me and you were talking about would be like part of secret societies, back in the day. It'd be like in a secret school or a school of higher thought or something like that, that was apart from the common rabble, like they just couldn't understand it. And so much so, like I know, sort of kind of going on a tangent here, but like with ancient Egypt, there's two different languages that they use. They had like Coptic, which is like the language of like your normal everyday person. That's the stuff that you see on like business ledgers or trade ledgers, stuff like that. And then you would have the hieroglyphics, which is the sacred or the holy language of the royals, and that's what we see, like we liken or to ancient Egypt the most, because that's what we see the most of. A lot of people don't really know about Coptic. And so that's kind of like the way that we are using language is kind of like the holy version, and then you have all the other stuff that nobody, I'm not trying to say it's holy because it is. I'm just saying that as far as the separation, of like certain concepts and understandings and the language kind of developed around it versus what everybody else kind of uses and society uses just to get along and just kind of keep the machinery moving. So it's always been kind of that, but like kind of go back to where I was. There's the stuff was secret for a reason. If you just like let it out to the normal people, or if what you were talking about was in direct defiance to systems of authority back then, off goes your head, or you get excommunicated, or this or this and that. There's all these different things that'll happen to you because you said something that pissed somebody else off or just didn't match their worldview, And so now we're at a point where we're able to be more tolerant of that. And so in that way, not just the information age and all that stuff that's happening with technology, that in itself is something that's brand new. At least or it's territory that we haven't really stepped into before, but a lot of us aren't really recognizing it. We're still seeing a bunch of noise, a lot of us, and confusion. But once you're able to recognize these things, you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's a pattern here that's developing. And so, yeah, that's really fascinating when you see that. But as far as the kind of the fractal version that I touched on initially, there's the version that we're of ourselves that we're learning, and through self-investigation and all that. And then there's the direct kind of almost as a direct consequence, we're seeing those things play out on a civilizational or societal level, and then they're just kind of like resonating back and forth between each other, and to find homeostasis, and but there's also the no going back to the way we were before. Like we can't go back to, just farming and everything, just like living the provincial life, of everything kind of being the same every day for years. No major technological advancements. Just things are the way they are, and because it's how they've always been. We can't really hold on to that anymore because things are changing so much. But because they're changing so much, it's kind of forcing us to kind of go along for the ride, but also realize that there's this whole new kind of element of uncertainty. And I think that through that element of uncertainty is when we'll, like, once we are able to kind of come together and kind of strive for that, or at least acknowledge that, then we can come together more as a society. Because there's, like I said, a lot of it right now is just trying to consolidate everything into a framework of some sort of another. But if we're stepping into the unknown, that was what I like to call the dark jungle, all you have before you is just your lantern, and your machete. Your lantern can only shine as far as what's right in front of you, and your machete is like the tool that you use to kind of navigate your way through and kind of blaze the trail. So I think that the crisis that we're going through on an individual and a societal level is kind of on purpose. I think it's actually part of the track of evolution in a way, because that's where everything's kind of led up to is this point, right? And it's kind of through that kind of constant compare and contrast, or thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, that we'll start to see each other in a different light. We'll start to have more common values that are born from our own understanding of ourselves, that we then actualize into the world. And it just turns into enough people doing that at some point, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's what this community is kind of about in some ways. And there's a lot of other out there that are kind of doing the same thing. And so now it's just a point of all these different organizations kind of developing under the same principles and values, that at some point will just kind of blossom out, and they'll start to become more of a majority, as long as they don't get snuffed out.
Mhm.
you know
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to abbreviate some of the points there, one is you mentioned there is a privilege today that we don't, not just us, but anybody doesn't really have to have these sorts of conversations in secret. We're not worried about someone shutting us down or giving us the death sentence
right.
because of heresy. Um, we also live in a time where things feel really chaotic, information and truth wise. Where we were talking about, which led to this, was that this idea of all these competing frameworks out there of knowledge and morality, and I think where we are trying to talk about here is how we can kind of step back from them and liberate ourselves individually from them. But then there's also this need to still come together again and agree on some things, not through like
Right.
mandate, but hopefully, shared agreement and consensus. So that
Yep.
seems to be the big game that's being played out in society. And just to kind of loop this back to, this is primarily a discussion about your journey as an individual, and that's what we spend a lot of time talking about. But then it's almost inevitable at some point to pivot and look at the whole world. When we have these individual experiences and these big shifts in ourselves, that by itself is quite revolutionary. But then it almost forces us to think about how we relate to the whole world, because it's constantly trying to influence us and shape us and manipulate us, and we can work to do the same back. This interplay between culture and individual is ongoing. So really fascinating territory there. And again,
Right.
I feel tempted to keep talking about that, but I also do want to I want to aim some more personal questions at you. But
Yeah.
before I do any pivot, any more to say on what I just said there?
No, I think you did a really good job of kind of wrapping it up there. Really succinctly. That's
Mm-hmm.
a difficult word. But yeah, no. Just my final point on that is basically, like a lot of people are like really interested in manifestation, stuff like that, and how to do it, what it means. But it's something that we do all the time, every day already. And society is, like I was saying, like is just an environment that we react to, and it also reacts to us. And so, if we think about, or if we live in a way that's not congruent or authentic with ourselves, then that's what we project out into society, and then therefore that's what makes up society.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it gets built off of,
Mm-hmm.
is all that fake stuff you tell about yourself. But it was society that told you all about it to begin with. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
So it takes a backing away from that, and to start to become into yourself, like learn about yourself and what your true values and principles are, to what feels right, and there's that ineffable feeling of what's good and the justice and what's right, versus the moral framework, which is more absolutist. Like if you're not this, then you're bad. It's not that. It's like it's something that's a drive within you that you can't explain. And it seems kind of apart from everything else. But so anyway, once you really get into that and bring that out into the world, and then the world will start to reflect that, and it'll be affected by that, and to the point where it'll start to carry on through others, basically. And so if you want your environment to change, you have to change first, basically. And then your environment will match you. Not always. Of course, you're going to run into like bumps here and there, but because it's just the nature of people and nature itself. But the more you do it, that you live true to yourself, then, I mean, at the least at the end of the day, even if you didn't make a whole lot of ripples, that happened within your lifetime, then no regrets. You did the best
Mm.
you could, and you lived as authentically as you could. But then again, like after that, the ripples will keep going after you die. Like Nietzsche himself, man, he died, with hardly anybody caring about him, or appreciating his work. Same thing with Kant, like these people didn't really get to enjoy the popularity and the world renown that they have today, in some respect, because it just wasn't ready for it. Like the world wasn't ready for it then. These things, the world had to wait for these things to these ideas to kind of settle,
Yep.
and chewing on them for a while before we could actually be like, hey, maybe they're onto something. So a legend is never a legend within their own lifetime, hardly, and when they are, it's pretty rare.
Mm. Well, much more to be discussed on the societal front. But you did mention something I really liked in there. Important, I guess we can call it phases of self-investigation. There's approximately, some kind of recognition. In your case, it was this kind of spontaneous epiphany. In others, it might be more, intentional mindfulness investigation of some kind. But something, in the phases of self-investigation, there is some kind of catalyst, and then it can lead to this deconstruction of self, and then there's this reconstruction or this building of authentic self, which you just talked about there. The more people we have in the world living authentically is a good thing. In terms of authenticity, I know earlier we talked about stability, and in a sense, nothing's ever stable once and for all. But at this point, do you feel relatively stable compared to where you were when all this was happening and all these changes and insights were bubbling up? And I'll ask,
Definitely.
I'll
Yeah.
add, I'll tap one more question, kind of related, is are you at peace?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as stability goes, definitely more stable, but I'm also learning how to be more stable. So, like I said, I kind of grew up with like a lot of issues with like social anxiety, stuff like that. And so those types of things kind of presented a lot of blocks. It created a lot of separation, not just between myself, but also myself and the rest of the world and how I can relate with it. So those are still kind of there's still vestiges of that I'm working through, and so just even doing this interview, which there's a part of me that was really nervous about, but there's another part of me. It's like, hey, man, this is part of growth, you know, and so that's what it is. Is just the stability is found through. I feel like knowing where you are or having an idea of where you are and where you're headed. If you kind of have a course that you're on, then you're like, okay, at least I'm on a direction, and then I can just kind of handle anything that comes at me along the way, and they're all lessons along the way, or even if they're not lessons, it's just life, but at least you kind of have a guiding principle. So I think that's important. And let's see. Can you shoot the question at me one more time? I think I had
So
a
the
follow up to that.
first was about stability, relative stability. Sounds like the answer is yes, but although there's always ongoing recalibration. And the second was, do you feel at peace? Kind of related.
Yes. Yeah. So peace is a big one. So I got part of the whole experience that I had initially was super peaceful. It kind of set the standard for what
Nice.
peace should feel like. So, and it gave me something to kind of come back to, right? So that's another way I kind of felt lucky, like if you kind of live through your life looking for peace, you can never find it, then you're kind of stuck because you're always going to be on that hamster wheel looking for peace, but you can't find it.
Mm.
So I was kind of shown that or given that as like a major gift, and then it gave me that sense of peace that is unshakable. Like it's so strong, and it's so it feels so real, and it has so much purpose behind it that that you feel like everything else could just fall away. And it's like I said, it feels like home. It feels like that like I was saying earlier, like that stepping into the unknown, you kind of have to leave the home behind, but peace is the home that you can bring with you. It's that little part. It's that souvenir or that heirloom from your house that you bring with you, or from your home. And so, and again, it gives you something to come back to. And I like to say that it's every day that I'm totally blissed out all the time, man. Everything's just like groovy. But no, everything's not just groovy all the time. I still have like triggers or whatever I deal with, and I still have hard days, bad days, Sometimes my primal parts of myself or whatever, my suppressed parts of myself, will take over. And then it's just kind of a process of like always trying to come back to peace. Like, okay, well, I know I'm going through this right now, but I know what peace is. All I have to do is kind of get through this, learn from it, grow through it, and then I could find the peace in it. And so I kind of started coming up with my own kind of technique for this. It's really simple, super, super simple. Is look for where peace is hiding. And peace is hiding behind everything. Because everything is just in your mind. Everything is just a thought. Everything is just interpretation of what's going on. And all peace is just on the other side of the coin of what you're looking at, you know? And sometimes all it takes to get there is just to remove all those thoughts and remove or sit with the feelings and process them. And then at the end of that, you find a moment of peace. And that's all these things are too. Just to kind of add that is whenever you feel peace, it's peace within the moment. It's not perpetual. There's no guarantee that peace is going to be felt the next moment. It's always in right now. And that's the only thing you can ever really do anything about is where you're at right now. You don't live the next second from now. You don't live in the next second that you just experienced. You're right here, right now, at all times. And so that means that you have to accept everything that happens within the now, you know? And then when you do that, you have this thing that we call the past that lives in our head, or memory, that remembers what peace is and says, and it'll tell you, well, hey, if you let it, say, well, I know what you're going through right now is really tough, and it may seem like the world's burning, it may seem like your life is just about to just fall apart, but there's this peace that you can find in that. It's basically kind of really wrapped up in the serenity prayer, right? It's which is so funny because it's something that you go to like AA or whatever you learn about, and then just like think it's part of their kind of doctrine, but no, it's really the answer to finding peace in the moment in your life. Is to be able to tell the difference between what you can control and what you can't, and accept that as the truth. Like this moment, I can't control everything that's going on in me, but I could accept it and find the peace within myself and with the situation. And even if I blow up, even if I hate myself in the moment, even if I hate somebody else I'm looking at, and all these feelings come up, just realize it's temporary. It's just what's going on right now. And the peace is at the other end of it. It doesn't have to keep going. Like just as peace isn't perpetual, neither is all that crap you're going through. Then it just becomes more of a choice. And then you can get into like Viktor Frankl, like what he was talking about, like being able to respond rather than react. Like the world's going to want a reaction out of you. You don't have to give it to them. You don't have to give it to yourself. So then peace can be found in that.
Yeah, that's really great. It feels like such a privilege if one is lucky to have that baseline, just to have
Yeah.
that taste, because like you say, anybody who claims to be blissed out or peaceful 247 is probably, something more there that they're not sharing, or they're just, one in a billion people. It feels like.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's their version of look for heaven.
Yeah, yeah. So for the most of us, what feels like the sweet spot is knowing peace is not some perpetual thing, bliss is not some perpetual thing, but the memory, the experience of knowing peace is there can get you back.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like that is permanent. So the state might not be permanent, but getting back there, you can rely on that. And that's quite a
Yeah.
place to
And
be.
what's great is like through people like Ian McGilchrist or Jill Bolte Taylor, like with her account is you could have everything go away. You could have your memory and your cognitive capacity and all that stuff will go away. And what are you left with? This overwhelming sense of peace and awe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we keep trying to find, but all this crap keeps getting in the way. But she tells us, through her stroke, that all that stuff goes away automatically when that part of your brain is shut down.
Yeah.
And then what you're left with is all that stuff that you've been looking for your entire life.
Yeah, it sounds really, woo out there, or just wishy-washy, but I love both of those references, and there's 100 more of them, but McGilchrist and Bolte Taylor both sort of tying it to the brain architecture, and how
Yeah.
it feels like the right hemisphere is this place of peace and sort of wide view and equanimity, and the left hemisphere, not to oversimplify it, but the left hemisphere and a lot of activity in the brain is kind of what fogs that up. But
Yeah.
that piece is always there. They're both kind of operating, and we're at the mercy of that. But that
Right.
peaceful uh, foundation is always there.
Yeah, definitely. And I like how McGilchrist puts it too, is that basically like the master and his emissary, basically the one who's calling the shots shouldn't be calling the
Yeah,
shots.
yeah. It's
They don't like they're trying to make sense of out of information and abstractions, which you can go all different kinds of ways with. And what should be calling the shots is your intuition, your feelings about, justice, well, and right and wrong as far as what makes more sense as far as life is concerned, like
mhm,
what is beneficial to life and what leads towards death and destruction
mhm,
basically, and just a bad time,
mhm,
like you could either go towards having a good time or a bad time. Bad times are always going to happen regardless. I call that necessary suffering, like you could be driving down the road one day and you get a flat tire, and that's going to ruin your day. Like told, like if you had plans, you don't anymore. Those change. So yeah, and that's suffering that you can't really get away from. Or if you stub your toe, or if you sprain your ankle, or stuff like that. And I know it's kind of more physical stuff that happens, but I mean, there's kind of a mental aspect to that too when it comes to suffering, like somebody died, like you're really close to, or heartbreak from a relationship that didn't work out, you got cheated on, stuff like that you can't, like you want to control it but you can't, those things just happen. So that's necessary suffering. So the unnecessary suffering is all the stuff that the left brain will come up with, and it's all the stuff that you tell yourself, well, it should be this way, but it's not, so therefore it's not right, you know and so when I say like between right and wrong, that's what I mean as far as what's right, in spite of yourself or despite yourself, you know and but yeah. And I was kind of on track there, but kind of lost myself off a cliff there. But yeah, that's pretty much what I was trying to get across.
um, here's another. Not it's kind of a maybe abrupt question, but it's I think it's an important one. I don't mean this in a negative way, really. But what are your thoughts in relationship with death?
Well, it's not negative because it's just a fact of life. It's scary for people because they don't know. There's no way they can know what's waiting for them because they haven't experienced it yet. So, and there's people that had near death experiences, and those people come back saying, "Oh yeah, I'm cool with death, man. Like I wish I could die tomorrow. That'd be great. I don't have to be here anymore,
Yeah,
suffering with the plebes. you know, I can just check out
they're
and know that
almost
I'm good."
resentful of having to come back in some cases.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Or they come back all blissed out and then that blissed outness wears off. And they're like, "Oh crap, I wish I could just go back." So but yeah, so I kind of listen to those guys because I mean they're the closest approximation to what goes on after you die, that from a subjective standpoint, that's better than anything else we have going on, I think, which is all just speculation. So I mean, I because I trust their accounts, I feel pretty confident. But I've also had my own experiences. I've had an out of body experience when I was younger, and I kind of had my own. That was kind of a trip in itself. So that kind of gave me a window into the other side, so to speak, to where I know that I'm not just the body. I'm something else that is wrapped up in this body. There was an actual process of coming out and going back in. So, and that kind of tells me that even though this body feels like it's mine, it's not totally mine. It's of the earth, and whereas this energetic kind of soul part of me is inhabiting the body, but it exists somewhere else. It could exist independent of the body. But at the same time, everything that you know or learn when you're in the body gets transferred over. Like that's still you. Like if you're out of your body and you're this other thing, it's still you. It's your consciousness. It's everything that you learned. Like it all gets retained as far as your memory. And so that kind of brings up a whole nother can of worm of questions: is where's memory stored? Is it just in the brain? Because you would think so, if because you can get dementia, you can get knocked on the head in the right spot and
Yes.
lose like who you are as an identity. And then you have other fun stuff that comes out of it, like dissociative identity disorder. You could be a whole bunch of different people,
Yep.
So what's going on? And but what's cool is, yeah, where's all that stored? Is it all in the brain or is that somewhere else? And I mean, I don't have answers for a lot of that because I didn't experience a lot of that subjectively. But the only thing I can account for is that your memory gets carried over. But as far as, and even kind of like the stuff that you think about yourself too, like your own forms, like your own, the fake simulated reality that you constructed, that kind of comes over too. But it's more expansive. Like you can actually place it within the framework of being connected with all things, kind of a thing. But even that aspect can be subdued because your belief systems still come with you, so you're not able to recognize that more of expanded awareness because you're still in your own way. So from like even as a spiritual or soul being, so I think it's really interesting how that can carry over and how much, remember we are talking about earlier about how much your environment reflects your inner world. The same thing I believe happens on the other side too. That your environment that you experience is a reflection of who you are.
Um, I'm sorry. I'm looking at next questions.
Okay.
I'll pick a couple more, and then I want to give you some space to also add anything else. One is on psychedelics, so you can answer this either from experience or from just awareness of what the science is telling us about them. Where how do you see psychedelics and how they fit into this landscape of self-investigation, but also just more broadly? For example, I think the FDA just fast-tracked them now for therapeutic research, therapeutic use in post-traumatic stress disorder for veterans, for example. So anyway,
Yeah,
that's a big open topic. So play
it
with that
is.
however you'd like.
So, yeah, I know that just happened. It kind of blew me away. I mean, part of me is just like, oh, that's really great. And another part of me is just like, what's going on beneath the surface?
Hmm.
Like, is there an agenda attached to this? Because basically, if you FDA approve anything, then anybody can get their hands on it, and they can do whatever they want to it and then peddle it, package it however they want. So, I mean, yeah, there's definitely some major positive benefits that can come out of it. And there's a lot of stuff that can kind of get twisted too because the people that are handling it have their own agenda, whether it's profit or they have their own ideas of what it does and how it works, or it can go a bunch of different ways. But overall, I feel like psychedelics it can be a very positive, very kind of eye-opening, life-changing possibility for some people. For everybody, I don't know. Everybody has their own tolerance levels. Everybody has their own kind of framework for understanding. Some people, because like growing up, man, like I kind of grew up in the drug culture, right? So weed and crack and psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, man, that stuff was just around, And I could just be walking down the road one day and run into a buddy of mine, and he's tripping on mushrooms. But he's also like, at a garage sale and just like rifling through a bunch of stuff, not really doing much anything, and just feeling really good while he's doing it.
Hmm.
So to some people, mushrooms or psychedelics can just be that. It could
Yep.
just be having a fun experience, and things are kind of wobbly for a little bit, and the walls are melting, and the grass looks super neon green, and the tree is waving at you, and that's pretty nice. That's pretty good, and you feel good. It's a body high, right? Like it makes you feel good, and you feel connected to stuff, and then there's the other aspect of it where you can have like a transcendental experience with it. And sometimes that happens when you don't even like expect it or go looking for it. And so that's another trick too, is do you have the capacity of where you're at right now to be able to have an experience like that, you know? And what are the odds that you will or not? You can't control that. Like you can try, or you can follow like a framework or a ritual, and that helps, because you go in with an intention, but still not a guarantee, and so to try to make a guarantee out of it could also risk trying to see something that's there when it's not, so but just kind of based on my own experiences, I had both, right? I'm able to kind of relate from being that kid that did mushrooms or whatever, and when I say kid, I mean like late teens, early 20s and stuff, and just having a good time, hanging out with my friends, and just and just getting stupid, and just feeling good. And then later on in life, I've done mushrooms again. I've actually grown them, and we'll do them, and just by myself or with my wife or whatever, and then I have different types of experience. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's the same. I'd still be like waving, talking to trees or whatever, and feel really good, connected to everything. And then when it becomes more transcendent is when that state kind of goes down another level. Like you feel connected, but it's not just like, oh, like everything's cool, everything's groovy, everything's just love, peace, and chicken grease, right? It turns into something that's just like more transcendent than that, like more profound than that. Like you feel a deep connection, a deep visceral connection to everything around you, and so and that and like I was talking about earlier with that Kundalini awakening is a lot like that. They're really similar. Um, and then from that, I've had experiences too that I thought were pretty interesting. What I thought was kind of a weird thing that I ran into was, I was a gamer growing up just as much as, the average person, I think, in this society, but the hallucinations that I would have were usually video game based. And I used to have a lot of dreams, and sometimes do, that are still kind of video game based. And I mean, I can make the parallels, from like the Matrix and all that. But I always thought it was kind of interesting. And but that was just kind of one level of it. I mean, yeah, there could be a lesson behind that or something going on, a reflection of myself or whatever. But I had there's two experiences that I had that were kind of really profound. One was the ability to connect with others. Like with my wife, for instance, we had like a really nice, profound connection to where we connected kind of like on a soul level, which is like kind of like tantra, right? Like something you think you can get out of like practicing the hell out of tantra, right? But you can have that experience, like if you're both feeling the same way on mushrooms or whatever. And it's really like a deep, beautiful experience where you're both kind of crying, And also had something similar with a cat that I had. I'm a cat person. I still have cats to this day. But I had it was actually the mom of the cats that I have now. I remember like having like this moment with her, and like it was seem if I know to anybody else listening, it could be like just like whatever, you're tripping, dude. It means nothing. But to me, it was like a really profound experience with this cat, and that she was also able to reciprocate. Like she looked at me, and I could tell that she could see me, not just look at me as I'm like, oh, I'm a cat, blah blah blah, but like see me as my soul, man. Like she'd see into me, and then from that moment on, we had like a deeper connection, even after I sobered up or whatever, right? Like she was like my buddy, She'd always come around to me a lot more and stuff. So we did connect on a really deep level, but it only happened because of whatever blockages that were in my way that the mushrooms eliminated. So I thought that was really interesting. So then there's this other experience that I had that's actually had twice, was in that there's more to this, but I just kind of remembered it, but I'll get to that after this part. But anyway, I was able to close my eyes, and I was just kind of meditating, and I was on mushrooms. It's the same strain and everything as before, and I started seeing this code, and I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And it was really small at first and really fuzzy, like super fuzzy and tiny, but it seemed like it was moving, kind of like vertically, kind of like strands of code, I guess you like in the Matrix or whatever. But it was something like that, but also kind of something organic, like how you would see like strands of like DNA, like wouldn't like see them like unravel or whatever, put next to each other, and like here's a chromosome, here's a chromosome. It kind of looks like little ladders. It was kind of like that, but like moving like up and down. And but that was like the fuzzy aspect of it. And so the more I kind of tuned in on it, the more they started to kind of realize into symbols. and these symbols look like something between like Japanese writing and runes, like Nordic runes, something between those. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, and that happened one time. And then I was able to kind of come back to that where it happened again, but not as much, because I wanted it too much, I guess. But of course, there's this part of me that was like, okay, well, that's just like a interesting anomaly, and I could have just been out of my brain, just trying to make patterns out of what it already knows, because otherwise, if I didn't know about DNA, how would I use that as an example? And if I didn't know about language and Nordic runes and all that already, then how would I be able to conjure that in my mind or see these things to begin with? So yeah, definitely, I come at it from a more materialistic aspect. But what's funny is the part that I laughed at is years and years later, actually within the past couple of years, I found this guy that conducts research based off of DMT, and what he does is he gives people like a really light dose of DMT, and then he puts them in this room like a little enclosure, and he has this laser that's pointed to a spot on the wall, and they're supposed to, while on DMT, look at this point on this laser and then tell the research or whatever what they see. And like I think it was like, I don't know, like 60-70% of the time, people report seeing these symbols that looked exactly like what I saw, and like drawn out and everything. I'm like, what is that? And
I've
then
seen
but
that
this guy's,
research.
yeah, I can't remember the name of the guy that started off the top of my head, but basically, yeah, I was like, oh man, it's like the Matrix code or something, right? But here's the funny thing is like what he's trying to prove is that the reality is simulated, that what you're looking at is objective reality, and then there's code that underlies it. But what I think it might be is that it's projected what onto, like we're projecting those onto what we're looking at. Like the code could actually be within us, and we're looking, and we're just able to like realize it like on if we're looking in the right way, because otherwise how would I be able to see it behind my own eyeballs or my own eyelids?
Hmm.
I don't have to look at a point on a laser on a wall. I could just close my eyes and see the same thing.
Mm.
So I thought that
Um,
was kind of interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So like such a huge topic, and there's probably so many different kinds of reactions. I'll paint a couple positions on this in this landscape of psychedelics. So Bernardo Kastrup, do you know him?
Yes, panpsychism. Yep.
Yes. So he has, I think a helpful insight. It's very pragmatic, I guess. This, what can we say about psychedelics that seems pretty grounded in science? It seems to dysregulate this thing we call the default mode network, which seems responsible for reinforcing our sense of self and what we value, and it shakes that up. And when that happens, that feels like, as a consequence of growing up and going through life and getting older, that network seems to kind of harden and narrow around who we feel we are and what we believe and what we want to reinforce about what we see. So to shake that thing up feels therapeutic, and that by itself is something to look at, and that's kind of the speculated mechanism for why it helps in therapy. Like treatment resistant depression, for example, someone's default mode network could be really hardened around a bunch of beliefs that are just actually causing them to suffer. So to bust those
Right.
open is
Yep.
therapeutic. Now that we
Right.
can talk about psychedelics and just talk about that and leave it there, and that's interesting. And then on the other side, there's these really, you know, profound experiences, like you were describing and many others describe, and Bernardo Kastrup himself describes. And it's not like we can take those experiences as giving us a glimpse into some true realm that we can't see, but we also can't like say for sure that's not the case. We kind of have to sit in the middle with it at the end of the day. But so I just look back at all these and say it's so fascinating, and to see like both ends, because of course you have the psychonauts who will take extreme doses, and Terrence McKenna kind of famously being one of those folks who was talking about machine elves and what they were teaching him, and him and his brother trying all these experiments to find
Mhm.
the philosopher's stone or bring it into our reality or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but this is another rabbit hole topic. But like the way I look at it is that um, more starting on more the simple side. It feels like as a consequence, a universal consequence of aging, we kind of harden around our beliefs and experiences, and to shake that up feels healthy and therapeutic. But then, of course, there's this other realm of phenomenology that occurs that's fascinating, and I don't know how to make sense of that, but it's certainly pretty wild, you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, these anomalies, they kind of pop up and you can't just explain them away,
Yeah.
And what's funny is they keep popping up, like we can, like, the next generation is going to have their own versions of that too, it doesn't go away, because you don't think about it, or you try to hide it or ignore it in some way, these things keep happening.
Hmm.
But yeah, to me, it's just really fun and exciting. Like, I've always been kind of like a more of an imaginative kind of a person. I always really liked speculative fiction, stuff like that. Just really thinking about things differently than, what's handed to you, basically. And I feel like that's where the real sauce is, man. That's where the real juice
Yeah.
is. That's what everything kind of everything kind of really moves based off of those things. Like, somebody had to first invent the tool for the tool to be used, right? And the tool when it was invented was one of a kind, and it had to first become a thought first, So same with, like, science fiction, like a lot of science fiction is becoming science fact, like who was it? Jules Verne, and you know. With From the Earth to the Moon, stuff like that. Talked about rockets and rocket fuel before they were a thing, and about, what, 100 or so years before they were a thing, and goes on. Like, AI was talked about in science fiction long before it's here, and so because of that, I think that the ideas we have behind AI is so twisted. We're trying to make it like science fiction without actually treating it for what it's actually able to do, and like, and all these fears and concepts and ideas behind, like, AI is going to wipe out the planet, or it's gonna subjugate humanity and all this stuff. No, that's science fiction, man. That's just stories. I mean, we can make that happen, yes, if we really want to, but we don't have to. It could be something else. It could be. It's just that all these science fiction stories were meant to be like warnings, or just negative consequences most of the time. And so that's what we kind of learn to expect. Like, we don't have a whole lot of good stories behind AI. Because good stories are boring. you know. So, but yeah, I think like phenomena like that is something to consider. And there's this guy. I actually have a couple of books of his. Is Eric Wargo. He talks about that quite a bit. And he's a scientist, and so his work's really dense. Like, it's really academic, kind of styled. But he talks about, like, time loops, or like strange loops, what Eric in the community brought up earlier, and like this phenomenology that happens throughout society, and it just keeps happening. It's just like on these loops, and how, like, these ideas will feed into technology, which will feed into more ideas, and it's just kind of circular, and that's how humanity kind of iterates on itself. But what's funny is he also it's well, I won't say funny, but what's interesting is he talks about retrocausation, and that's like something. It's like the effect happening before the cause, and that even has been looked at by quantum physics, or just physicists, really, because if you slow down, or if you go small enough, basically, then time works differently, right? And so you could actually see, and they've done experiments with this, where with light, or photons, where the light will actually react um, based off of an effect that has yet to happen, but it happens in a really short amount of time, like on the Planck scale, right? But basically, light will seem to react to something that it hasn't done yet. And I mean, I know that's really simplifying it grossly. And I mean, if you're interested in that and looking that up, I highly recommend it. I wish I can remember the name of the study, but yeah, it's basically just experiments with light and time, basically, retrocausation. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And so that's also something that also kind of seems to play out. Like that's what we consider to be like predictions today, that or precognitive predictions. Like we could see the like we are the effect. Basically, we could see something that before it happened. We could see the cause before it happened. Basically, and if somebody has precognitive dreams, which I've had too, like you have like a snippet of dream about the future, and it could be something kind of mundane and banal. Um, but yet you see it before it happens. And so what does that mean? Like, how does that work? And so there's all this other stuff that kind of goes on that just doesn't make any sense as far as like a linear progression that everything is kind of based off of. Like the construct of time they created is based off of the linear progression and be able to predict based off that pattern. And so then we have these things that kind of bust a hole into that, and you're like, well, what do I do with it?
Mm.
And so, unfortunately, most of it gets relegated to the realm of just phenomena. It's never brought into normalcy because we don't have a way to kind of categorize it or make use of it. Really, we don't have a way to capitalize on it.
Hmm. Yeah, quantum mechanics comes to mind as like an older, similar, the spookiness of quantum mechanics. What's going on
Yeah,
there?
quantum entanglement and all that. Yeah,
Yeah, and so anyway, there's a stack of mysteries that to me, it's not so much that I want to resolve these mysteries. It's just that they are a little beacon of we don't know exactly what's going on. We being humanity and the culmination of all our knowledge and tools and sophistication. There's still so much mystery out there. So that's
oh, I
humbling
know.
at the end of the day.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff too that's hard to rectify, even if when it comes to like the acceptance of somebody's subjective experience, like you can experience some things yourself that are kind of out there, don't really fit with the usual way of things. And there's experiences that other people can report that are also out there, but they're different, or they can seem to contradict, your experience. And so you have to ask yourself, are they telling the truth, or are they just merely framing what they've seen in a certain way that isn't the truth, but what they experience is still real, and so it gets kind of tough that way. Like for instance, there's people that say that they've encountered like demons or demonic presences or people that are possessed, or they may have seen something, and you may not have, but you've seen some weird stuff yourself, so how open are you to accepting their account of what they saw and are able to report within their framework of understanding, and how much are you able to report based off of your framework of understanding, like who's closer to the truth. And if you are pretty well closer to the truth, objectively, then even then, like, how do you know that for certain? Like, how do you still reconcile that just based off of what you know? So, because some people, if they're more of like a atheistic or spiritual background, but they've experienced some phenomenological things, they may look at something as a demon, like an archetype of a demon, as is something that's just totally false. It's just a construct, right? It's just a representation of the bad parts of humanity, or something like that. But if somebody actually encountered something like that, or a machine elf or something like that, then where do you put that? How
Mm-hmm.
does that fit within the overall framework?
Mm.
And so yeah, it's just really interesting to kind of see all these little data points and then try to put them together and give them a spot. And then sometimes you don't have a whole lot you can do with them. You just accept them as they are and just say, okay, well, either I learn more about it or I don't, and if I do, that's great. And if not, then I'm not going to talk crap on it, because that'd be to invalidate somebody else's experience when they could be telling the truth, or at least the truth as well as they know it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can be skeptical and cautious, but we don't have to dogmatically dismiss things. I mean, William James sort of
Right.
did this, his approach with varieties of religious experience, which he more or less meant as spiritual experience, but just his approach to that book, as I understand it, I've only read parts of it, was just to interview people and hear what they had to say about their experiences, not judge them, just record, just take in
Right.
how are you seeing life, how are you how is your relationship with spirituality, and how do you describe that? And if you do that with 100 and 200 and 300 people, you begin to see the patterns. So anyway,
Yeah,
there's value
that's
in
really
just
interesting.
listening and collecting. We don't have to really make hard sense of it all.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like that with the Enemies Project that I
Yes.
on YouTube. Yeah, and that's all about that. I love that show, that channel so much because that's the whole premise behind it is to bring two people together from opposing viewpoints or ideologies and have them talk to each other, but not just have them talk to each other, but have them put them in a position where they think like the other person
Mm-hmm.
to be able to understand what it's like to live in their shoes,
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of give them that container, that space to be able to do that. And the mediator that they have, oh man, so good, so good.
Nice.
From playing like both sides, and making sure both sides are heard, and to kind of translate for one side if they're kind of struggling a little bit. So really good show, man. And I feel like so kind of based off what we're talking about there, I feel like we have something like that going on now, and I hope it becomes more of a technique, that's used more, like adopted more and made more widespread.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have too many questions to get to all of them, but I'll go after what I think is um, a good a good ending. Uh, so is in this practice, this journey of self investigation, are there anything about what is there anything about what you experienced that you would wish others would notice? Again, this is not a dogmatic thing and pounding it into people's heads, but if if there's something about your experience you would wish others to notice, what might that be? And then beyond that, is there anything else? Really broad topic, broad conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Sure. So, what I wish people would notice is not up to me for one,
Yep.
but for two, I think it's just a willingness to seek out the truth, or to first to understand that you may not see everything as it really is, and what you're been shown and what you've been told, there might be more. My headphones decided to die. Sorry about that.
All good.
Yeah.
Can hear you now.
All right. So we could edit that part out. um, where was I? So what I want other people to try to do is at least sit with themselves one night, preferably by themselves. They don't have to be. They can be sitting next to their partner or whatever. Man, just think about thinking. That's part of it. Because a lot of the time we don't even recognize our own thoughts, or they just kind of play in the background, and you're always thinking about something. They're always applying to something else. Always pointing the flashlight of our consciousness onto some idea or some worry or anxiety. So just to try to sit calmly and just recognize thoughts as they are. Don't
Mm.
judge them. Don't put them anywhere. Just watch your mind do its work, right? Do its magic. And then also realize that everything you think about doesn't actually have any bearing on reality whatsoever. Like everything you're thinking about is just in your head, and it's not doing or being anything else. It doesn't have to be anything. So just as far as a starting point, and that's all. And because that's what makes it tough. Like I kind of had my own experiences growing up, so it kind of led me down this path a little bit. But to kind of come at it totally blind, like I said, it really helps to have like a inciting incident, like a dramatic event in your life that kind of really wakes you up to this kind of thing. But if you don't have that going on, the best way to start is just by questioning your own thoughts, or giving your space to do that, and just kind of work at it little by little. It's not an overnight kind of a thing. It takes practice and determination, just like anything else. And basically, what you're doing is you're developing a new habit. Like we all, and that's what we are as human beings. We're habitual creatures. We pattern recognition is the name of the game. That's how we survive. That's how we recognize everything that's going on around us and make sense of it. So it's just creating a new habit, basically. And I'd say it's the most important habit because you have to start there even before you make any major changes in your life. Because you can't really make a change outside until something inside you changes first. And sometimes something on the outside will make that change happen, or put you in a position where you have to do it, or you're in a better position to do it. But if that's not going on, then you kind of have to
start from square one and just take it one step at a time. And when it comes to like the type of patients for something like that, and another, I mean, a trick that I use for patients like that really helps me altogether is the story that I heard about somebody that was replacing a array. I think it was a mirror array on a telescope. I think it's like the Hubble or the GWT telescope, one of the two. And but anyway, they're saying that there's these mirrors are really precisely set, so you have to be super careful. And also, there's like thousands upon thousands of screws, little screws, and they're up there with the drill, taking out all these screws, and they have to replace the mirrors, that broke, and then they have to put all the screws back. And that's a really tedious and really scary, and stressful situation to be in because you're out in space, you're out in a suit, and you got the sun beaming on you, it's throwing all kinds of radiation at you and stuff. And you have these little screws you're working with, and if you drop one, I mean, I guess you can't really drop it; it's gonna float in front of you, or it could just float away, and you're screwed. So you have a lot of stuff kind of going on in your head. But the person that was doing the interview or being interviewed and talking about it, said, well, what they had to do, the kind of mind frame they had to put themselves in, was one screw at a time, which was basically to take every screw as the only screw, and that's the only thing that mattered was just that one screw. And then after that screw is done, you do the next one, then you do the next one. But it's every time, it's just the one screw at a time. And to kind of approach everything like that, I think is just genius. When you take anything, like if you're learning a new skill or anything, it's just one thing at a time. Don't worry about what's coming up next. Don't worry about everything that you've already done. Just worry about where you're at right now, because otherwise you'll trip yourself up. You'll give yourself anxiety, and you'll freak out. And if that happens, in the case of the person replacing the mirror, it could have been catastrophic if they freaked out. So, but I'm not saying every situation is like that, but I think that's a good technique to use, basically. So when it comes to like looking at your thoughts or giving yourself space to do that, it's just like taking each thought as like its own screw, man. Just like look at it, see it as it is, and then move on to the next one as far as how you relate to it and your experience from it, and just kind of take it one step at a time.
Yeah, this all seems timely because recently, as you know, we've talked about just the essentiality, non-negotiable part of mindfulness, and of course we pause before looking at it that way because we don't want to be dogmatic about anything in this practice. But mindfulness 101, we'll call it, just the ability to kind of observe your own thoughts, seems so necessary to this whole thing. I'll throw in I thought about it this one way a long time ago. It's like everybody's probably had the experience at some point in their life where you hear a recording of your own voice and you're like, who the hell is that? Like, it doesn't sound anything like the voice in your head, even as you're hearing yourself speak, and it just feels so alien.
Yeah, it feels uncanny.
Yeah, uncanny. And I see mindfulness as the same thing with your mind and thoughts. It's like in real time, as you're just going with everything. That's one view, one way of understanding yourself. But to actually take that meta position, if you want to call it that, where you're just observing, trying to be as neutral as possible, just watching your own thoughts and not trying to actually, go along with them. That's like hearing your own voice for the first time. It's wild. And the more you do that, the more you see patterns and feelings and clusters of things that you just never could see otherwise. So it's so extraordinarily powerful to do that and do it over the course of time. I can't help but just completely agree with. And as you said too, your second emphasis there was just one thought, one step at a time. Just take inventory of what's right in front of you, and keep it there. And it's prevents getting overwhelmed with the whole, everything else.
Right. And I mean, it helps to have a direction for sure if you've been on a path for a while, but even just having an ultimate goal, like some people are doing mindfulness because they want to achieve enlightenment, or they want to become like a leader in business, or something like that, or they want to be an entrepreneur. And then those things are well and good. There's nothing wrong with it. But to be stuck on the goal so much can actually trip you up. And
Mhm.
sometimes it could actually steer you away from where you should be going. Like I believe everybody kind of has a natural impulse, or there's a part of them. It's kind of like closest thing I can relate it to as far as nature goes is like a migratory kind of an instinct. There's something that kind of pulls you. It could be your interests or just something that you kind of line into. And so sometimes the goal that we're after may not be the true end goal for ourselves, but we don't know that yet. And if we get stuck on that, then we'll kind of like try to shove a square peg into a round hole. Like, yeah, I mean, you have all the right tools to do it, but it's going to hurt, and it may not work out the way that you hope, So, but it's just kind of learning to listen to your intuition and stuff too. And that's part of the process. Like, kind of have to start somewhere. Sometimes it starts as an intuitive process for some people. Sometimes they kind of have to come at it blind and kind of just like throwing their fist in the air until something comes of it, I guess. Um, but yeah, but definitely it's also when you said the uncanny part, or we're talking about the uncanniness of it. I feel like the process itself of mindfulness and all the techniques and everything that you use, you can kind of create a structure or a toolbox basically that you're kind of familiar with, and you kind of like, just walk right into or step right into when you need it, but also it could be, oh man, sorry, I just kind of blanked there.
Yeah, well,
um,
what you were just saying, and this might not have been where you were going, but and I think you said as much earlier in the conversation is just being able to apply it when you need it. I've always seen mindfulness as, I don't, I'm not claiming to be thoroughly educated on all the mindfulness schools out there, but from my own experience, there was a period of weeks and months and a couple of years where I was in it in a really disciplined manner, and I wasn't looking for an experience or a particular state. I've always seen it like training a muscle or something, and
right.
that capacity is now with me, and it doesn't mean I have to sit and practice it all the time. It's kind of developed now, and I could, of course, nurture it more if I want to, but otherwise, it's just applying it in real time to your life whenever
Yeah.
it feels appropriate to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. And no, that's, I think that's hitting the nail on the head. And that's where I was going is don't get caught up in the end goal that you're trying to get to. Just let the goal be the effect that you see, that you're doing in life, how you're applying it to your everyday life. That should be the process itself is the goal basically.
Hmm. Hmm.
And oh yes, and sorry. And also I remembered like the uncanniness is sometimes like well you can well yeah you can get your techniques and everything that you come back to, but the effects will sometimes still be uncanny. Like the uncanniness will never completely go away because you could have some stuff that comes out of it that could either show you parts about yourself you didn't see before, or parts about the world, or something you didn't see before. And so that's something else that was either out of sight of your awareness or just presented as a paradox at first, but now makes sense,
Hmm.
and then that just is just a lot of that, all these things that were kind of outside your awareness, or just something that you couldn't chew on before, but now you're able to, and so
Yeah.
it's the process of consciousness, growth, and expansion, like your window of knowledge and understanding grows, so I think that part's pretty cool, and which is still kind of uncanny when it happens. You're like, oh no way, like
Yeah, that's a great point. Our life is like this treasure chest of accumulation. Like the default mode of life is like we're out there having experiences. It's just going into the memory banks, and the next day we wake up and do the same thing. More experiences, more memory banks. But then
right.
there's just kind of stopping for a moment, and not necessarily like rifling through your treasure chest. Memory doesn't work that way, but just sitting and seeing what arises. And it can sometimes feel out of the blue, like something that happened 23 years ago on this
Mhm.
particular day that doesn't seem at all relevant to what's happening today, but it arises for some reason, and you're in this spot where you can look at it a little differently and add more perspective on top of it, and that's really powerful stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really like now you mentioned that, and it's like what's making that call? right? Like,
Yeah,
what's the
right.
cause for that? You know, because it could be something that happened years ago that you forgot about. And I can understand if you had like a trigger, like you were watching a movie or saw something happen outside of you that can trigger that within you. Then you're like, oh yeah, I can relate to that because this happened to me so long ago. But it's not that. It's just like what you're saying. Just it'll happen out of the blue. You're like, I forgot about that. Like, why is it happening now? What causes that to happen? What's pulling the levers in your subconscious or
Yeah.
wherever else that just delivers that to you?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, without having a word for it. I mean, we can slightly lean on, more brain sciencey kind of language if we want to. We can talk about the right hemisphere, potentially the master doing that work. But,
Right.
whatever the exact scientific mechanism is, just giving the space and allowing it to happen seems really powerful.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, I know that I think as far as science can go is to admit that some stuff happens outside of our awareness that we're just not aware of.
Yes,
You know,
right.
it just happens. And there must be a cause of it. We just don't know what it is yet, you know.
Yep.
And as much as I kind of laugh at that, I also appreciate it because I have
Mm.
to say the same thing. You know, we just kind of have to I think this is what I think when stuff like that happens, it conjures up the definition of what I think faith really means. And sometimes it's just faith in the process, man. You know, if it's faith in these things happening and they're working for you and they have a net benefit, but you do have no idea where they're coming from and you have no idea where you're headed.
Yep. Yep.
You have a vague kind of an understanding of
Um, is there anything else you'd want to add on top of this stack of topics and little, you know, t- little tangents we've been on this whole journey? Anything else you'd
it.
want to tack on?
Uh, I think we covered quite a bit. I can't think of a whole lot else I'd like to cover. But I do want to express my appreciation for having this talk with you and also
Likewise,
for what you're
Aaron.
doing. Yeah, like with the self-investigation community, man, I think it's really a great thing. I know it's kind of small and kind of fledgling right now, but it's already off to a great start. Man.
Y-
I think a lot of good stuff's going to come of this.
Yeah, yeah, and this is something you know already. We'll just say it for the sake of anybody who might listen to this later. Is you know, people's stories are really powerful. We can put out a little guide how to self-investigate. We're trying not to be dogmatic there. We're just trying to open the right doorways, and
Right.
that can go so far. But what's also really powerful, in addition to that, is just hearing about how folks have experienced this whole thing. And I really, just reacting on the fly here. I like your story a lot, just because it represents how this can happen sort of spontaneously, and you almost have to just try to react and understand what's going on.
And
And
it's had an impact.
that's a pattern out there. I mean, even the head of consciousness research at Johns Hopkins had a similar experience, and just sitting in his dorm room in college, he was kind of overwhelmed with this experience that's it's approximately like yours, and then he had to unpack that, and now he's kind of pivoted into his role. But that is something that happens out there. So it's just yet more of how this can unfold in so many ways for different people. So
Yeah, no,
it's
definitely. I see like what's really crazy is like lately I've been seeing like celebrities kind of coming forward with these types of experiences, you know? Like just yesterday I was watching some on YouTube about Flea for like the basis for the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He had a transformative experience like that. It's changed his life. And he practices what he preaches basically, in that regard. But I was like, no way. I mean, the guy that said, what's the matter, McFly? Chicken? That dude, from Back to the Future, well, of course, Red Hot Chili Peppers, but I always had that he always kind of represented like this bad kid, kind of macho kind of a guy to me. He was, and for a long time he was, like that was the identity he kind of crafted around himself because he had a kind of a rough childhood and stuff. And then he had an experience later on in life that really opened up his worldview, and that was kind of similar to mine. And he really started to understand life differently and adopted values kind of based off of like, hey man, like everything sucks, yes, but it doesn't have to suck, and we don't have to add to it. We just enjoy the moment, and each day as it comes. And so, but yeah, I recommend seeing that. I can't remember what it's called, but I could send you the link if you
Yeah,
want
please
after.
do.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
well,
such beautiful, man. It was bringing tears to my his accounts of it, and like just the way that the interview was set up. And there's him, and there's also Pete Holmes, man. And Pete Holmes is this guy that he always seemed kind of like the edgy kind of comedian, like the stuff that he did, and his stuff was kind of crass, but um, he really talks about like non-duality and stuff like that, and then
Talk
spirit
about
and
synchronicity. So just yesterday, I am a Pete Holmes fan, and of course he has that one famous clip where he's just talking about how nothing makes sense, and it's totally true.
yeah,
Like reality doesn't make sense when you really look at it. This is absurd. But
yeah,
yesterday, what I saw is him speaking with Rupert Spira, a non-duality based talk, and I've
that's right.
yet to listen to it. So you're kind of it's really timely you bring that up, Pete Holmes and
Yeah,
non-duality.
no, that's great. That's like watch that thing with Rupert Spira too. But and there's all kinds. Like the more I watch, I'm kind of a YouTube addict. I don't really watch anything else, but it's only because it's other people out there, man. It's they have their own accounts and stuff.
Yeah,
It's not fantasy and reality TV and crap. It's real people having real experiences, man. And I mean, of course, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm always in learning mode. I'll watch like crap every once in a while just to kind of chill for a little bit and just kind of like let my brain give my brain a break.
yep,
But yeah, no, that's it's really wild, like how many people are out there just kind of coming to the surface now that might have been under wraps for a long time, but all of a sudden now they're just kind of coming up to the surface or have been within the past like few years.
yeah,
It's just like here it is,
yep.
and I think it's awesome.
Yeah, so it feels like what we're up to as a project is trying to build something to map these experiences onto and not have not have this map be, pushing certain things, but just some scaffolding to make sense of these experiences in. Because the more we can throw our experiences into the pot and compare them and contrast them, I think there's a lot to learn there. So,
Yeah, and I
um,
think that one of the biggest hurdles is just validating those experiences first
yep, yep,
and not trying to defend our own, so hard. I think those are the two big hurdles. If we can get past those, then things will go a little smoother.
yep. Well, this has been
Yeah,
awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much for taking the time.
yeah. Likewise, Jesse. This is it's been really great, and it was really nice to be able to talk with you about it. And it's been part of my journey too, is just talking to people about it too. And I
Yep.
live kind of a hermit type of lifestyle in a way, so. And I don't really have a chance to talk to a lot of people about it in a way that they'll understand or appreciate. So this has kind of helped me do that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
Right
no, I
on.
really appreciate you, man.